So this is the eclipses of October and November 2022. If you followed my work for a while, we do this every 6 months because eclipses are some of the major events and sometimes even the major turning points for the year. And they always affect certain signs. And they're not good or bad, but they can create major shifts in our lives and sometimes herald the beginning of a new chapter, the start of a marriage, the birth of a child, the change in a career. So these are these major points in the astrology of the year. Oops. Again, this is the eclipses of October and November 2022. As I record this, this is October 22nd, 2022. So in a few days from when I'm recording this, we're going to have a solar eclipse, but we are already in the energies of the eclipses. For those that don't know who I am, my name is Katie Sweetman. I'm a consulting astrologer. A consulting astrologer means that I do work with clients, and I saw some familiar faces when we were starting the webinar, and some of you are my clients, but I do work one-on-one with people. And I also, of course, write horoscopes, I write content, I do these webinars. And I'm also a psychic medium, and that part doesn't always come through in my writings, but that's a huge part of what I do and how my work as a medium helps inform the sort of the one-on-one work that I do with my clients. And for those that don't know, I'm in the New York City area. I'm actually just right outside Manhattan and New Jersey, and I created Empowering Astrology in 2010. I created it because I wanted a space for my own voice. And at the time, and astrology, actually, the astrology world has shifted a lot in the last 12 years. I wanted there to be a space for the way that I saw astrology. And at the time, it didn't feel like we were having these types of conversations. And ultimately, the type of work that I do, even though this is a webinar and it's about the eclipses, but at the crux of what I do is for people to use astrology as a tool for transformation, growth, self-awareness, and ultimately to be better humans in the world. So let's talk about our agenda for today. This is mostly for those who just want a kind of a structural overview of how we're doing this. Of course, it's going to be introduction, the sun and the moon, divine alchemy. The sun and the moon, they are two of the most important planets. I realize the moon's not a planet, it's satellites, and the sun is not a planet. It's something that we as a planet go around. But in astrology, the sun and the moon are a planet, and they're two of the most important planets in astrology. What are eclipses? I mean, it's a pretty basic question, but it's an important question that we all be on the same page about. The lunar nodes, eclipses happen because of the lunar nodes. We'll get into that, of course. Intersecting arcs of time. Astrology is about time, our relationship with time, how we measure time. And of course, what's going on with these eclipses in October and November 2022. And more importantly, what does this mean for you? Oops. So let's do our introduction. Of course, I have to let some people in. So eclipses open a doorway. And what does this mean? About every 6 months. I say about every 6 months because sometimes the astrology is really precise. Something on or around that. I'm just going to ask everybody, if you've just joined the call, to make sure you turn off your video and turn off your mic, just because we're recording. There we go. So eclipses, they open a doorway. So about every 6 months or so, we have eclipses. Usually they're two, they're a pair, but they open a doorway. Things come in and out of our life. They are very powerful and from an energetic standpoint. And it's very common. In fact, if you go back and you look at your life, especially around certain key eclipses, things come in and out of your life. Time bends up, time bends and speeds up. And that's the thing I think we always have to understand about astrology, is that astrology, it measures time, our relationship with time, sort of how time unfolds, the quality of time, this idea of archetypical or metaphorical time. And it just seems like around the eclipses, time speeds up. Things are happening more rapidly and quickly. And I say bend because around the time of the eclipses, we're turning a corner in the astrology of the year. And there's this sort of interstitial point between the end of one eclipse chapter, which is a 6 months period, and the beginning of a new one. And here we are, on October 22nd. As I record this, we're in that sort of bendy, liminal, interstitial point between, something's ending and something's beginning. Fortunes rise and fall, and sometimes people get a little bit nervous about eclipses, and eclipses have a reputation. They have a reputation for a reason. All you have to do is look out in the world right now and see what's going on with people in positions of power. People are stepping into positions of power. People are leaving positions of power. You will see this very commonly around the eclipses, sometimes exactly around the eclipses. See what's happening in Britain right now, for example. And then there will also be these key points throughout the year where the energy comes in and out, which we'll talk about in a moment. As I said a few moments ago, eclipses, they happen every 6 months. It's a really basic point that we all just, need to sort of get into us, because every 6 months life turns. It's a new chapter. Eclipses, they push along the story of life, but the eclipses that are happening right now, they're part of a deeper story of transformation. This is a story that's been, for example, going on since November of 2021. And honestly, since there's points in 2018, 2019, there's points in 2013, 2014, points in 2003, 2004. I could go back, and that's, there's this idea of time as a spiral. And it's really amazing and creepy at the same time when you start to see the threads line up. One of the examples that I use in astrology to talk about the eclipses is that this is idea of a stage. And if we look at eclipses as the end of one act and the beginning of another, then maybe it seems a little less, let's say, anxiety prone. You're watching a performance, and then what happens? You get to the end of the act, and there's that sense of movement and anticipation. The curtain comes down. You have a sense that there's movement behind the scenes. The next set, the next stage is readying. People are coming in and off of stage. Curtain comes up, and maybe it's a profoundly new set piece. Maybe the characters that have been with you over the past couple of acts are not there anymore. There's new people. Where am I? How did I get here? So that's what eclipses do. They bring things, they bring out, the curtain comes down and the curtain comes up, and sometimes dramatically so. And that's the thing about eclipses. They have a reputation for a reason, and they can portend these sudden shifts in events. So something that you hear me talk about in my work is that the astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. But there are these moments in time, and the eclipses are one of them, where it's not that we lose agency and power, but it's the 50% that's not us is definitely driving the story. And how do we work with eclipses? We can make decisions to end something and start something. That part is on us. But when we end something and begin something on an eclipse, it's typically final. Here's an example. Although I didn't consciously do this, I moved on an eclipse. I moved right after a solar eclipse in Gemini. And I realized after I'd signed the papers and I made the decision, I was like, oh, shoot, I'm doing this on in eclipse energies. And that means that I'm probably never going to go back to Brooklyn, where I had been for 16 and a half years. So the things we do around eclipses are really powerful. The decisions that we make are really powerful. They can be major turning points, but it's important to remember that there are forces that are greater than us. And if you've ever been through something involving weather or the ocean, or that there are forces that are greater than our ego. I had a bad accident in an ocean once, and that taught me that the ocean is way more powerful than me. And they are vortices of energy. And that's something that I say over and over again in my work, is that astrology is energy. The energy of time, how we live time, how time and this energy passes through our lives, what it opens up, what it closes. And this time around the eclipses, it's really honestly intense. And we're only a few days away from a solar eclipse. So I'm pretty certain that you all are feeling this already in your own ways. The sun and the moon, if you think about it, what's a solar eclipse? The moon passes in front of the sun. And if it's a total solar eclipse, you can't see the sun except for the corona. The sun passes in front of the moon. We can still see the moon, but it turns red. And so there's something on a sort of a deep symbolic level where those two energies, those twin forces of life, father sun, mother moon, yang, light, yin, reflection, are momentarily cut. And so that's where that sense of ending and beginning and change in direction happens. Depending on what sign you are or what rising sign you are, that eclipse is going to activate a certain part, a particular part of your life. Depending on where, this is a story that in its own may feel like really like a part of now, like, oh my God, I didn't see this coming, just for example. But honestly, it's been there. It's been there probably for a few months, probably for 6 months, probably even for 12 months. And that's the thing about eclipses, that we've been seeing foreshadowing and hints of it as the sun and the moon and different planets have hit particular points around the eclipse degrees. This even goes back years too. And for me, and I'm sure for all of you, that's why you're here today, it's knowing where the eclipses are showing up will give you a sense of what's shifting and what's shifting for this year. So if you took my Astrology of 2022 webinar, I'm going to do one for 2023 in December. But if you took that webinar, I always will go to the eclipses. I'll go to Saturn, for example. I'll go to other major things. But the eclipses will say, okay, where is the major story this year? So at the end, when we go through each of the 12 signs, you're like, oh, right. Because that's the thing about these eclipses. They're part of a story that we've already been in. And so at this point, you're like, oh, this story again. But it's a different quality of time. It's a different quality of the story. And maybe because of certain things that are being activated with this eclipse, maybe it's the part of the story where things get a little interesting, for example. The Sun and the Moon, Divine Alchemy, Part 2. And this is some information that we've covered in past webinars, but it's important to reiterate, is that the moon and the sun are the yin and the yang of creation. What are eclipses? Eclipses is a new moon that is within a certain degree of the ecliptic. Don't worry, we'll go back into the science of this in a few moments. A full moon, a lunar eclipse, is a full moon that's within a certain degree of the ecliptic. So the sun and the moon, we have a new moon every month. We have a full moon every month. Sometimes we have 2 full moons in a month. And this natural ebb and flow of the lunar cycle is one of the major powers of astrology. That's why in my work, I'm always focusing on the new and the full moons, because it tells me where is the story for every month. But then you get to the eclipses and it's not just a little story, it's a big story. As I said a few moments ago, there is this idea of the mother, the moon, yin, the father, sun, yang, these two forces that give life to everything. You have the conception, the new beginnings of the full moon, and you have sort of that birth and release with the full moon. said a few moments ago how the lunar cycle, every month we have a new moon, every month we have a full moon. That's where that ebb and flow, it sort of comes in and out of our reality, and it activates certain parts of our chart and activates certain parts of the current astrology, and it begins to like weave and construct our reality, both on an emotional level, but also how events happen in our life. The lunar cycle also plays off of the energies of Saturn. Now, we wouldn't, and maybe unless you know some astrology, we don't always think about how the lunar cycle and Saturn are connected, but they actually are. The lunar cycle, there's the cycle of like 27 days, but there's also the 28, 29-day part. I think it's called the metonic cycle. Saturn takes 29.5 years to go around the sun, 28, 29 days, 29 years. You also have the progressed lunar cycle, the progressed new moon that happens right before the progressed lunar return that happens before the Saturn return, for example. So the sun and the moon are light. Saturn is matter and the material, and how the light needs a shape and it needs a container, and how the light takes shape and form in our lives. And maybe it's a little bit of an esoteric point, but there is this connection between the lunar cycle and Saturn, and how the sense of whether it's Saturn, the fate of Saturn, sort of fated events with Saturn, or even fated events with eclipses. This is what I said earlier, the astrology is 50%, you're the other 50%. And that's the thing, it's really, you can't control an eclipse. It would be like saying, I'm going to control the sun and the moon. I'm going to control the forces of creation. I'm sorry, we can't, but we can be present with it. And I can only speak for myself, of course. And as a Scorpio, I'm having eclipses in my sign. I had eclipses last November. I had eclipses last April, May. And this is really, it's honestly been a very challenging, one of the most difficult times in my life. I have a lot of personal resource and self-awareness and maturity, but dealing with the death of family members, I've had 5 deaths. You probably all don't know this. I had 5 deaths between March of 2021 and March of 2022. 4 of which were close family members, including my mother. My father has cancer now. So as a Scorpio, this is one of the ways in which I'm experiencing, especially with Saturn, my 4th. And I can't, as much as I'm a Scorpio, I can't control death. I can't control sickness and illness, and the fact that there are times when people are meant to leave my life, and I have to sort of sit with that and be present with it. And that part I can control. What are eclipses? Part 3. So I always like to go into the astronomy and the mechanics of things first, because we really need to understand like what an eclipse is. Why is it happening? And so this image right here is probably a 17th century image. It shows, how eclipses happen. First and foremost, astrology is really astronomy. So an eclipse is an astronomical event. The moon passes in front of the sun, or the sun passes in front of the moon, which you see in this 17th century image. And so it's the sense of light being blocked, whether it's the light of the sun or the light of the moon. And with the astronomy of eclipses is that we can predict it. We can predict when eclipses are going to happen. The ancients knew how to predict eclipses, but nevertheless, for some, it kind of snuck up. And then you imagine being, let's say it's 2,000 years ago, and you look up into the sky, and now the sun is starting to disappear, and the sky goes black. What would you think that is? Probably not a good omen. What would you think it is if you looked up into the night sky and the moon turns blood red? And this is why there is from a mythological and a sociological standpoint, eclipses have this meaning. I think it was just kind of a European history example. I think it was during like the Battle of Bosworth Hill with Richard III. And I think there was an eclipse, and he fell from his horse. And there's this idea that eclipses brought down a king. But anyway. So here is a nifty animation of how an eclipse happens. So you can see the light of the sun is being blocked by the moon, and it creates this sort of focal point, and that is what's called the path of totality. This is an example of the path of totality for a solar eclipse. This is courtesy of NASA. During a solar eclipse, the moon partially or totally blocks the light of the sun. I don't believe the eclipse in a couple of days is a total solar eclipse. I think it's a partial solar eclipse. It's a little bit of a technical point. The closer the new moon is to the ecliptic, the more that this is a total solar eclipse. And then during a lunar eclipse, the Earth blocks the light of a full moon. So here is in an animation of what a solar eclipse looks like from Earth. The moon is passing in front of the sun. This is credit from NASA, and then it's creating this halo effect. It's called a corona, and you can see the solar flares around the sun, and then the moon passes away. So again, if this were 2,000 years ago or more, it would be a pretty terrifying event, but we have science, and science says this is a natural astronomical event. Here's an animated GIF of what a lunar eclipse looks like from Earth. Why does the moon turn red? Well, it turns red because of refraction of light in the atmosphere. It's not, I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a second. Nobody, to my knowledge, nobody called a lunar eclipse a blood moon in the last 10 years. That's something that feels distinctly social media driven. And I think it kind of creates a little bit of a negative energy around around this. But that's where that term comes from. It's just a lunar eclipse. Do not call it a super blood moon, full moon lunar eclipse. But you know, your life is your own. Like clockwork, we can predict the eclipses, where the eclipses will fall because of the position of the lunar nodes. So science, what is the ecliptic? The ecliptic is the path that the planets take around the sun. So the Earth follows along the ecliptic, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Sometimes the planets will be above or below the ecliptic. This is called declination. And that point, that scientific mathematical point, where the moon, as it goes around the Earth, intersects with the ecliptic, is called the lunar node. Presently, the lunar nodes are in Scorpio and Taurus. They've been in Scorpio and Taurus since the middle of January of 2022, and that is why we are having eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio, because the new moon, Scorpio new moon of October 25th, and the Taurus full moon of November 8th, 2022 is within a certain amount of degrees of the lunar eclipse. It has to be within, I think, 17 degrees of the ecliptic for there to be a lunar eclipse, and I think it's no more than 10 to 15 degrees of the ecliptic for a solar eclipse. Part 4, the lunar nodes. So we were talking about this a few moments ago. In order for an eclipse to happen, a new or full moon needs to be within a certain degrees of the lunar nodes. The lunar nodes, of course, they are an astronomical point, but they're actually, when you put them into astrology, put them into the astrology chart, they're very powerful. It's a powerful axis in the chart. The lunar nodes move backwards through the zodiac and spend 18 months in a sign. And that's something to, when you're looking at an astrology chart, and maybe you know a little bit of astrology, the planets move counterclockwise around the chart. What's called transit. The lunar nodes go clockwise, but from the perspective of the direction of everything in the chart, it appears that the lunar nodes go backwards. Another important fact is that the lunar node will spend about 18 months in a sign. So the lunar nodes went into Taurus and Scorpio back in January, and they will be in Taurus and Scorpio for 18 months. I said this a few moments ago, but putting the lunar nodes, and this may even be the first time you're even hearing this term, the lunar nodes, north node, south node of the moon. When you put them into your chart, they're already there, and most astrology programs already calculate it. It's a powerful axis of fate. For example, I was born with the north node in Virgo, the south node in Pisces. So that is my lunar nodal axis. It means that when I was born in 1978, the eclipses were happening in Virgo and Pisces, the signs of my lunar nodes. But when you were born, the lunar nodes were likely someplace very different, and those two signs are very charged. And when you have major planets around the nodes, transiting or eclipses, your life gets interesting. So as I said a few moments ago, the north node is in Taurus, the south node is in Scorpio. Previous to this, the north node was in Gemini, the south node was in Sagittarius from 2020 to 2021. If you notice the difference, they're moving backwards through the zodiac. For these eclipses, October, November of 2022, we're in the middle of the story. How do we know this? Because the nodes, number one, are about in the middle of the zodiac signs of the nodes. I believe right now they're about 15, 13, 14, 15. I should have looked at my calendar of Taurus and Scorpio. That's the middle of the sign. Another reason we know that it's the middle of the story is because the story began November 19th of 2021. How do I know that? Well, that was the first eclipse in the series, and that eclipse was in Taurus. I believe it was at 27 degrees of Taurus. Now the eclipses are happening in the earlier parts of Taurus and Scorpio, or the middle part of Taurus and Scorpio, and the last eclipse won't be until October. I think it's October 28th of 2023. So whatever is happening right now with these eclipses, things haven't fully resolved. Just like if we did this webinar back a year ago, we did this webinar 6 months ago, the story hasn't fully resolved. And typically we need to get into next April, May, and to start to see how this is all working out for us. In July 2023, the nodes will shift to Aries and Libra. So again, 2020, 2021, we had the north node in Gemini, and then it went to Taurus. And then in July 2023, the north node will go into Aries. South node will be in Libra, which means that in 2023, and by extension 2024, because 18 months after July 2023, we're going to have eclipses in Aries and Libra. And if you are an Aries or a Libra, or you have major planets in Aries and Libra, maybe you're thinking, or maybe you should be thinking, is that 2023 and 2024 are going to be years of change and transformation for you. The first eclipse in the Aries Libra series arrives April 2023. I believe it's April 20th, 2023. It's a solar eclipse in Aries, and it occurs at 29 degrees of the sign. So the very last degree of Aries. And then we're going to have a solar eclipse in Libra in October of 2023. And then in 2024, Aries, Libra, Aries, Libra. So there's, with the North Node, of course, we were talking astronomy earlier, but the North Node is like true north in the chart. In your own astrology, the North Node represents this sort of directional arc that your soul or the self, whatever you believe in, is trying to move towards and evolve towards. Sometimes, often, it's a little bit more complicated. You have to take in account the whole chart, for example. But the North Node is new territory. And so collectively, we are all moving towards Taurus. The North Node's in Taurus right now. That means we are collectively trying to find solid ground, trying to figure out what sort of resources we need, how do we get our needs met, our material needs met, what is safe, what is stable, and what is secure. The South Node represents the past, and it represents also from a collective karmic experience, an area that we have to do our work on. I'm saying this as a Scorpio. The South Node in Scorpio means that collectively we have to face ourselves. We have to face our shadow. We have to look at the things that we haven't been looking at. There's a visceral quality to Scorpio. It's emotional, for example. And how do you really do your work over the next 6 months? And I know you're saying, Katie, I'm tired. I don't want to do any more work. I wish it were that easy. But the South Node also is a place where we release, we let go. And I was talking a few moments about a collective experience, but of course there's the personal experience, and that hopefully will be a little bit more clear when we go through each of the 12 signs. This is an old image. There's this idea of the lunar nodes and the dragon's tail, the dragon's head. When you plot out eclipses, especially in the series of where they plot around the Earth, it creates a spiral. This is something in astronomy called a cirro series. It starts at the top of the pole, and it spirals over 1,000+ years around the Earth to get to either the North Pole or the South Pole. And this idea, that's the Kundalini of the Earth, but sort of symbolically and historically from a mythological standpoint, this idea of the head of the dragon devours, the tail of the dragon release. And I think in Vedic astrology, I'm not an expert by any means in Vedic astrology, which is the astrology of India. You have the Rahu and Ketu. They actually look at the lunar nodes as if they are planets. This has to be said, and especially, and I am a very modern astrologer. I actually am a modern astrologer that does actually have a lot of traditional underpinning in the way that I look at the astrology. It's just from a more mechanical standpoint. So this is what I tell people. Astrology measures a lot of things. It measures time, the quality of time, how time unfolds, but it doesn't measure consciousness. And this is why you can look at the past, you can look at the past series of these eclipses, you can even go to the birth of these eclipse cycles. It could be 1300. The consciousness of humanity at that time is so different than the consciousness of humanity now. So you can't look at it as the same thing. And so traditionally, eclipses are viewed as a malefic event. Malefic means it's a negative, air quotes, event. Again, imagine it's 1,000, 2,000 years ago. You look into the sky as it starts to get dark. Where did the sun go? It disappeared. So that's where the ancients were like, this is a bad omen. So there is a sense of like, eclipses can portend events that aren't exactly easy. We have to respect eclipses. We have to honor that life sometimes comes with change and sometimes comes with unexpected change. It's part of life. It's part of the life cycle. As a modern astrologer, this is where it's like, how do we sit with this time? How do we use this time? How do we let it open our eyes and open our consciousness? And that's the part that we have control over. Just check the chat. Yes, thank you, Melanie. It's at 13 degrees. That's where the nodes are. Yeah, I couldn't remember because as a Scorpio, I got got stuff around these degrees in fixed signs. Part 5, intersecting arcs of time. You may or may not know this, but the lunar nodes, I kept saying like 18 months, the lunar nodes goes through each of the 12 zodiac signs, but the lunar nodes have a cycle of 18.5, 18.6 years, and a half cycle of 9 years. And kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because maybe it's going to become a little bit obvious in just a moment. So what was 18.5 years ago? What was 18, 19 years ago? Well, we had eclipses back in 2003, 2004 in Scorpio and Taurus. The North Node, as it is now, was in Taurus. The South Node was in Scorpio. And on November 9th of 2003, there was a lunar eclipse at almost the same exact degree as the lunar eclipse of this year, 8 degrees, not 8 degrees, November 8th. This time is at 16 Taurus. I think it was at 15 Taurus back in 2003. For me, because I was actually, obviously preparing for this webinar, I was like, wow, November of 2003, I was, some of you may know that I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area. I grew up in Maryland. I was living in Silver Spring after college. And that was the month before I went to New York City for the first time. It was in early December of 2003. If you're from the Northeast, there was a really terrible blizzard. I think it was the first weekend in December of 2003. I got stuck in New York. I was visiting friends. I say it kind of loosely. It was people that I knew off the internet, which was really scandalous for 2003. I didn't tell my parents I was meeting people off the internet. But the most important thing is that time in New York, like I felt like there was this seismic shift. I remember there was this moment I was coming outside of the subway, and you have to understand that even though I'm from only a couple of states away from New York City, I'd never been to New York City. It's kind of wild. And even my father, he's from New York State, but upstate New York, we never went. And I went for the first time, and there was this just immediate recognition, I'm going to move to New York. And I remember that trip as sort of crazy in the blizzard and getting stuck and having to sort of figure out my way back to Maryland, and thankfully having a very forgiving boss, because I was like, sorry, I can't come into work. I'm stuck in New York. There are no trains. Anyway, so I remember coming back from that trip and being like, wow, I really want to move to New York. And it took a couple of months. I remember that I was actually visiting some friends in England, and there was that sort of gong that went off in my head. And I was like, oh, wow, I really do have to move to New York. It's sort of this deeper realization. And maybe you are having sort of similar realizations around this time, like, oh my God, I have to do this. I have to, whatever it is in your life. But I was looking back at that period of time, and, that was really before some major, major shifts in my life. Then again, I'm a Scorpio. I also have Uranus at 17 degrees of Scorpio. So these eclipses are activating my Uranus, but that's just me personally. In 2003, there was no Scorpio solar eclipse. There was just a Taurus full moon. But in November 3rd of 2013, remember how I said there's a half cycle of 9 years? That half cycle was 2013. On November 3rd, 2013, there was a solar eclipse in Scorpio. And I want to point out these dates because it's important to see the threads, and sometimes there are obvious threads and sometimes they're not so obvious threads, but especially if you're getting into the what's going to happen to me mentality, it's just to understand that these are moments in time that are all connected. This is the thing about time. Time is really funny. Eclipses, we think, okay, well, there's an eclipse in October, there's an eclipse in November, so events are going to happen on just about October 25th or November 8th. But that's the thing about eclipses, sometimes they don't. And you can see the eclipse come in the midpoint of the eclipses. This is why my work, I talk about the midpoint of the eclipses. The midpoint is 3 months before and 3 months after. So the midpoint of the eclipses was the end of July and August of 2022. The midpoint going forward for these eclipses are going to be February. And this is why you want to look at the astrology of what's going on in February 2023, because it's sort of a bigger lens for the year, especially as we start to see the shift in the nodes and the shift in the eclipses starting in April of 2023. Another time when you can see the eclipses come in is a month before and sometimes a month after. So I used that story about me in New York City in 2003 is that eclipse was November, November 9th. And then a month later, I'm in New York City, and the seeds of a completely new life are planted. Eclipses and cycles of the moons thread together different points of time. This is where I become a total nerd. And even in my work, you see me reference other times over and over again, 2018, 2019, 2003, 2013, because these are all threaded. I had a client, we were talking about a major event that's happening in her life right now. And I was like, well, when did this all start? And she's like, Katie, there was this date in 2018. I looked it up and it was a full moon. And that full moon is the same degree as the lunar eclipse of this series. And so it's like literally the seed of the event was what, 4 years ago, with the eclipses, more than 4 years ago. I think it was May of 2018, for example. Time is circle. Everything is connected. And it seems this is why eclipses are so fascinating to me, is because the eclipse can be in the future, but we're seeing it now. Somebody has a really major event in their life, and I look at the astrology to kind of do the forensics, and it's an eclipse degree, but the eclipse hasn't happened. It's crazy. I don't know how that works. It's above my pay grade. Yeah. So it's kind of a crazy time how everything is connected. So when we're able to zoom out, and sometimes it's really hard to zoom out that far in our life, we can start to pick out how certain themes keep coming up like clockwork. And more importantly, eclipses mark the time and hours of our life. If you look at an astrology chart, if you look at a zodiac wheel, it's a circle. An astrology chart, it's like a clock. It's a lot of things. It's a structure, but it's also a clock. And where in the clock are the hours striking? Where are the big hands? Where are the little hands? And this is how we can sort of understand how eclipses mark time. It marks chapters and different parts of our lives. Since we asked about the election, I personally just try to stay away from political astrology, but we will see. We will see. Part 6, the eclipses of October and November 2022, so we can kind of get a sense exactly what these eclipses look like. So something that I've been saying throughout our time together today is that eclipses are some of the major astrology for any year. And so when I was preparing for the astrology of 2022, I did a webinar, for example, and I always look at where's Saturn? Where's the eclipses? These two things, Saturn and the eclipses, talk about the major drivers in our experience throughout the year. Of course, you can have a major configuration of energy. In 2021, for example, we had the 3 Saturn-Uranus squares, but for this year, I was looking at these eclipses by the way, and I was like, these are not easy eclipses. I'm just being real. They're not easy eclipses because of the energies that they activate. Why? These eclipses, first and foremost, are in what are called fixed signs. The fixed signs of the zodiac are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. Eclipses are in Taurus and Scorpio. Fixed signs by their nature keep things fixed. They are the signs that hold things down. There's a sense of reliability and stability. But that's the thing since 2020. And you're thinking, what about 2020? Well, what was going on in 2020? Well, it wasn't, a lot of things were shifting and moving. Well, because Saturn went into Aquarius, Uranus was in Taurus, and you have 2 major planets now in 2 of the 4 fixed signs. So logically, the things that are typically fixed and rock solid and anchored are not so fixed and not so rock solid and anchored. And that's why since 2020, it seems like life's doing a little bit of this, a little bit of an up and down. And some of the things that we thought would never change are changing. And so this is why these eclipses in particular, they are pivotal for the year, but they activate the energies of Saturn square Uranus. In 2021, we had 3 squares What's a square? You have Saturn is in Aquarius, been in Aquarius since March 2020 / December 2020, making a 90-degree angle in the sky to Uranus and Taurus. Uranus has been in Taurus since May 2018, March 2019. A square, 90 degrees is just one corner of a bigger square. What is a square? A square is the square of manifestation. Things come into manifestation and our physical life shifts and change when planets start to make squares to one another. Saturn is a planet that talks about things taking shape and taking root, going back into balance, having to deal with our karma and our lessons. Uranus is about awakenings, reinventions, things shifting because things have to shift, things going up and down. It can be a really volatile energy, but it's my belief that ultimately it's an energy that's trying to get us out of our own way so an evolutionary process can happen. And that's why in 2022, particularly with these eclipses, even though there were three Saturn-Uranus squares in 2021, in 2022, Saturn and Uranus are only 1 degree apart. So Saturn turns direct on October 23rd, turns direct at 18 degrees of Aquarius. We have Uranus at 17 degrees of Taurus. It is what's called a 1-degree orb. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. And then you add the energy of the eclipses, and the eclipses are a trigger for Saturn square Uranus. So we have a south node in Scorpio. A south node is a point of release, endings. It's a place where we really have to do our work. We have to do our personal work. We have to do our collective work. For example, in 2020 and 2021, we were doing our collective work around Sagittarius. What do I believe in? What is true? My truth is better than your truth. People clashing over truths, legal matters, justice, fairness, right and wrong. And that's where we were sort of seeing some collective themes throughout 2020 and 2021. But this time the South Node's in Scorpio and it's a new moon. New moons are new beginnings, new chapters. And this is a new chapter that's wrapped in the energies of endings and release. And Scorpio, by its nature, is a sign that makes us face ourselves. There is a demand to redefine stability and security, value, and worth. Why? Because the North Node, the other end of the sky, the other end of the axis, is in Taurus. Collectively are trying to reach towards solid ground, redefine what we need. And that's the thing about Scorpio. Scorpio talks about decay. I realize that's a really strong word, but if you're here in the Northeast of the United States like me, look outside your window and what are you going to see? Decay. The leaves are changing. It's pretty. The leaves are pretty right now, but that sense of decay, it's an ending of a growing cycle. It's an ending of a season, starting to get colder. And so Scorpio teaches us that life ends. Life is not finite. There is a cycle of life. But as things end in Scorpio, they are reborn in Taurus. Taurus is the end of April and May. It's the flowers, it's the fertility of life, and sort of the promise that even though things end, Scorpio and decay, that things come back to life in Taurus. That said, how do we get out of the anxiety of Scorpio and sort of the sense that things are ending and reach towards fertility, reach towards the things that are going to create security and our life, and even a different relationship with pleasure? You know, Taurus is so much about the pleasure and sensuality of life. But Taurus, like Scorpio, is a money sign. It's about material resources, the things that we invest in, the things that we own, property, but these more abstract themes around value and worth. There's been a story that has been unfolding since May 2018 and March 2019. Why those dates? Well, May 15th was the date that Uranus went into Taurus for the first time since the 1930s and 40s. Uranus takes 84 years to go through each of the zodiac signs. So this is the only time in your life, very likely, unless you are a very, very young child. And if you're a very, very young child watching this, anyway. So this is the only time in your life that you're going to have Uranus in this one part of your chart. And that part of your chart and that part of your life has been reinventing, transforming, awakening. Since May 15th, 2018, Uranus goes in, it leaves Taurus in November of 2018 through a retrograde, and it's back in Taurus on March 6, 2019. So that area of your life has already seen a lot of change, even if it's not obvious, especially depending on certain signs. It's not happening in a very overt way. But if you're a Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, Aquarius, it is overt. And the eclipses bring forward this story that has been with us for 3 to 4 years. And you heard me mention a few moments ago these 3 Saturn-Uranus squares from 2021. And when I was talking about the astrology throughout 2021, I kept saying 1 foot in new life, 1 foot in an old life, but sort of feeling like both those areas are going in 2 different directions. It's a little uncomfortable. We have to sort of push forward into something new. February 17th, June 14th, December 24th, 2021. Those are the dates of the 3 Saturn-Uranus squares. I know for a fact that I moved the week after Saturn square Uranus to New Jersey. I'm sure the roots were being formed in February of 2021, if not earlier. But these 3 dates for you might be, kind of pivotal times, pivotal moments. And that energy comes back to us with these eclipses, because particularly the lunar eclipse, but both the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse activate the energies of Saturn square Uranus. 1 foot in old life, 1 foot in a new life. And so as we go through this eclipse season and we go even into the new year, you may feel like, once again, your life is pulling in one direction and pulling in another. And that tension, it demands resolution. One of the things that isn't overt about these eclipses is Mars square Neptune. Why? Because Mars rules the Scorpio solar eclipse. Mars is in Gemini. In fact, Mars is going to be in Gemini for the total of 7 months. I went into Gemini on August 20th of 2022. It turns retrograde on October 30th of 2022 at 25 degrees. As it does so, it makes a square to Neptune. Neptune is at 24 degrees, I believe, of Pisces right now. So you have this energy of a Scorpio solar eclipse, new moons through the lens of Scorpio over the next 6 months, activating the energies of Mars and Gemini. So that part of your chart is going to get activated. When we go through each of the 12 signs, that will hopefully be more obvious, but a square to Neptune. So personally, I have Mars conjunct Neptune, so it's an energy that I'm familiar with. But for the rest of us, Neptune's an interesting planet. Neptune, like Uranus and Pluto, is an evolutionary planet. Evolutionary planets, they demand evolution. Evolutionary planets don't always care about what we want, what our ego wants, and what our ego needs. Neptune dissolves the boundaries between this world and the next world. It turns up the sensitivity. It makes us very intuitive, very compassionate, very emotional. But wherever Neptune is in the sky, that area is a spiritual work. We have to refine something. And Mars is typically the planet of action, drive, desire, power, motivation. Mars is very much an I want planet. I'm going to go after that and get that. Square to Neptune, maybe you're not getting it. Maybe it's not what you need. And maybe there's things that you're not considering are actually better for you. There is a need to align your desires with the desires of something greater. It could be source, creator, spirit, higher self, depending on what you believe in. Mars and Neptune, it's like, how do I put my actions and needs and desires towards the greater good? Neptune is also a planet of altruism, but it's also a planet of surrender, release, and letting go. So for the next 6 months, we're in this chapter where we need to surrender, release, and let go. It's not about what we want, or we have to figure out how to align our wants and needs and desires with something greater than ourselves, our higher selves, but not the level of the ego. So I said this earlier, but I wanted to put the dates down. There's a series of eclipses, and the series began November 19th, 2021. This was the date of the first eclipse. This is a lunar eclipse in Taurus. It was at 27 degrees of Taurus. Then we had a solar eclipse in April. This was, gosh, I'm blanking on the degree. I think it was like 16 degrees. But no, it was at 10 degrees. Thank you. It was at 10 degrees of Taurus, and then we had a lunar eclipse at 25 degrees of Scorpio. And then next year, we're going to have a lunar eclipse in Scorpio again on May 5th. And then the last of the series is October 28th, 2023, with a lunar eclipse in Taurus. So we're in the middle of the story. And that's why I said that things are not really sort of coming to a closure or sort of seeing the fullness of the story until 2023. This is for all you science nerds like me. Where is the path of this eclipse? Whereas it might be really hard to see on your screen, but in purple ink, it says greatest eclipse. I don't believe this one's a total eclipse, but where will you see the maximum of the eclipse is that pink line that's going over parts of Iceland and Greenland, tracing down to the right. It's going over the middle of Russia, down through Central Asia, over parts of China, and over India and Pakistan and Nepal, and even Sri Lanka. So there is a school of thought in astrology. It's not my lane, it's not my astrology, but there is a school of thought in astrology that where the planet traces, where the eclipse traces its path, those countries, things are happening. So for example, in 2017, there was a total solar eclipse. It drew a line right through the United States. So this is what's called mundane astrology. It looks at sort of these geopolitical and even seismic. That's another thing about eclipses, is that they can, you think about it, it sort of shifts the earth, and the earth shifts. And there was a solar eclipse in Haiti, for example, in January of 2015. And right after there was a solar eclipse, for example. And then for the lunar eclipse, this is the map of the world and where the certain areas, if you're wondering why there's a curvature, it's because the earth is round and light, how it reflects off of a curved shape. And so that's why you have up over the Pacific and the Western United States and Alaska and Canada, that's where you have the eclipse most visible. Over Africa and Europe in the center of the map, that's where the eclipse is not visible. And then you have shades throughout let's say the Eastern United States and South America, and Mexico and Central America. And then you have these shades throughout Australia and Asia and the west part of Russia. So this is for you astrology nerds. This is the chart for the solar eclipse in Scorpio. It's actually set for New York City. This eclipse is going to be, again, on October 25th, 2022 at 6:49 a.m. Eastern. That's 3:49 a.m. Pacific. Don't make me do, I think it's like probably 8 or so p.m. Australia. So this is a South Node eclipse in Scorpio. And as we have been saying throughout our time together, the South Node represents an area where we have to do our work. It's an area of release. There's a personal and a collective karma around that South Node. This eclipse is asking us to really look at our relationship with the archetype of Scorpio. I'm saying this as a Scorpio. And even if you're not a Scorpio, you all have Scorpio somewhere in your astrology, but there's also that sense of the archetype of this energy as it's connected to the 8th house. I'm getting a little bit on a tangent. So Scorpio is a sign that reminds us that things have life cycles, things end. It reminds us of that we all have our own conscious, subconscious, and unconscious relationship with power, control, facing our fears, facing our shadow. We all have that shadow part of ourselves that comes up at certain times. Scorpio has a connection to the sign of Gemini in general, and it's a sign where we have to really look at the choices that we're making in life. And are these choices fueled by shadow, or are they fueled by consciousness? So Scorpio says that through this deep emotional alchemy, we can transform. We can put light onto spaces in ourselves where there is shadow. This chart is, somebody asked about the chart. This is set for New York City. It is a whole sign chart. This would be a different chart if you set it for your own location. So these are new beginnings wrapped in endings, as I was saying a few moments ago. And this is the only solar eclipse in Scorpio. There's going to be, I think it's 2 in total lunar eclipses in Scorpio. This is the only solar eclipse in Scorpio because God is kind. No, I'm joking. So the next 6 months are through the lens of Scorpio. Death and rebirth. I know the D word's a tough word, but that word, death, exists in every moment of our life. Every breath that we take, every breath that we don't take. It's the natural inflow, exflow of life, the duality of life. Death or endings means that maybe over the next 6 months, you need to let go of things. And maybe it means cleaning out your house, or cleaning out a closet, or the things that maybe you have a negative emotional connection to, or a negative sentimental connection to. You don't want to keep it anymore. It's a thing where we can sort of hoard onto things, and maybe you have things that are connected to people who have passed on, but you feel that sense of guilt about still holding on to it. It's like there's stuff, but you're being weighed down by it. So it's like you need to let go of something. Scorpio, as a water sign, it touches on themes around intimacy, control, vulnerability, transformation, and even sexuality. It's sort of, we're looking at these themes around the parts of ourselves that we only share in the most intimate of situations. And I think back to 2013, 2014, especially Saturn was also in Scorpio those years. And it was like we were getting all these like sex scandals coming up, all these things that typically are hidden Scorpio, or not talked about Scorpio, or taboo Scorpio, were coming out into the light. And that's the other thing about Scorpio. It is taboo. And what is your own relationship with taboo? What is taboo in your life? And what do you feel a sense of uncomfortableness or even shame around talking about? But on a positive side of things, Scorpio is when we go to therapy. And maybe over the next 6 months, we really need to prioritize our emotional health, because Scorpio is saying that these are the things that we're holding on to, that we are unconsciously creating from. And these things that we are creating from, or even these choices that we're creating from, are not the most supportive in our life. This solar eclipse, it activates Saturn square Uranus. Saturn is again at 18 degrees. Saturn has just turned direct right before the solar eclipse. Uranus is at 17 degrees. And there's a bit of a hard edge with this eclipse. And it sort of reminds us that life sometimes has its own design. And maybe that's where the Mars square Neptune comes in. How do we learn to accept that? How do we learn to have peace? I have a client who I've worked with since last year rather frequently, and she just decided to let go of the things that she doesn't have control over. And before that, there was a lot of angst and agita and internal conflict that spilled out into the external world and in her personal life. And what if we all stopped, I don't want to say caring, because that means that we just give up and we start being jerks. No, but I mean, like, stop holding on to and trying to control the things that we just can't control. And maybe, just maybe, that gives us some peace, internal peace. So I have a little animation here. That's where the red dot is. That is the location of the solar eclipse in the wheel. And then we have, that's Mars square Neptune. Mars is the male symbol in astrology. And then we have the Uranus, Saturn square Uranus. So this is the lunar eclipse at 16 Taurus, November 8th, 2022, 6:08 a.m., 3:03 a.m. Pacific time, 6:03 a.m. Eastern time. This chart on the left is set for New York City. So it's just before sunrise here in New York City. This is a North Node eclipse in Taurus. So the conventional wisdom is the North Node is about bringing things in, new beginnings. The South Node is about releasing. So this is about new things coming into your life. But for those that are very eagle-eyed, you might notice that the moon is a mere 50 minutes, just under 1 degree orb of Uranus. So this is a really tight conjunction to Uranus and Taurus. And if 2018, 2019 started a story, Uranus went into Taurus, then this is the part of the story where the story gets interesting. And maybe there's a sense of plot twists, people coming in and out of our lives, but it's going to be thematically that part of your life that you've already been seeing things happening since 2018 and 2019. We have a very fun looking T-square, almost pretty tight looking T-square with Saturn. So a full moon demands attention. Something's in the spotlight. There's typically events around a full moon. These are events that we have to react to. Not always, but often. A square to Saturn is talking about karmic balance. Something needs to be put back into balance. There's a lesson. This is why sometimes there's the rise and falls around lunar eclipses and solar eclipses, but particularly lunar eclipses, is because somebody hasn't been doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's not, whether it's not correct from a karmic law or not correct from the laws of our world. And that's when people, things can happen. Somebody gets caught doing something, for example. But a Saturn square also demands that we make a commitment, that we look at the structures in our life, the relationships in our lives, how we are showing up, how are other people showing up in our life. And it could be a hard turning point, because Saturn can be very black and white. Something's either working or not working. And so for some people, it's a reality check. For other people, it's a stepping stone. For some people, it's, they're coming into more increased responsibility and power. And for other people, it may even be a loss of power. Part 7, the eclipses through the signs. I know you all have been waiting patiently. Just a reminder that these eclipses in October and November, they are continuing eclipses and the events from November 2021. So November 19th, we had a lunar eclipse in Taurus. Then we had a solar eclipse in April 30th of 2022, May 16th, 2022. And how these events of October and November are actually connected to these points of time. And you can even go back and look at February of 2022. That's when the midpoint of the eclipses, and even go back to August and the end of July, when the eclipses were at the midpoint. So that's where I don't want you to see an eclipse as a singular event, a singular day. It's part of a much bigger story, for example. Aries and Aries rising. And just a quick reminder, this is for both your sun sign and your rising sign. Do not sleep on your sun sign astrology, especially around eclipses, and especially if the eclipses are in hard angle to your sun. So for the Aries and Aries risings out there, these are 8th and 2nd house eclipses. So I want you to imagine a wheel. We have Aries as the first sign, Aries rising. So Taurus is the 2nd sign and Scorpio is your 8th sign. And so first we have a solar eclipse in Scorpio on October 25th. It's in your 8th house. So one of the terms that I use for the 8th house is I actually call it the 8th room. And over the next 6 months, you are in the 8th room. The 8th room in the astrology house is a necessary room, and it's a room that we all have to go to do our work, to face ourselves. When we go to the therapist, for example, we are in the 8th room, for example. The 8th room, it's that uncomfortable space where we actually have to get into our deepest self, our deepest emotions. And I know that doesn't necessarily sound enticing, but I would invite you to go back and look at events around the May 16th lunar eclipse in 2022. So the 8th room is our deepest vulnerabilities. It's our discomfort because we have to reveal something. There's the nakedness to the 8th room. The 8th sign is next to the 7th sign of relationships, other people. It's like you want to have a relationship, a romantic relationship with somebody, you're going to have to open yourself up. You're going to have to get naked, air quotes, and sometimes literally naked. And the 8th does talk about sex and power and control. And sometimes the less than helpful side of relationships, manipulation, sometimes even, God forbid, abuse. But this is where you have to look at relationships and how you show up at relationships and sort of how that reveals something inside of you. And even, from a health and wellness standpoint, really work on and heal and release something, especially as Mars is square Neptune. Neptune is in your 12th. So this is about trying to release something on a deep emotional level that you've been holding on to. And so maybe, especially with Mars in Gemini, Gemini is the space that talks about talking, communication, writing, thinking, learning. This is where you need to talk about something. This could be something from the past. It could be a trauma, something that you're holding on to. It could be a secret, letting go of a secret that you've been holding on to as somebody else's secret, for example. But the 8th is in the 2nd. There's also money spaces in your astrology, Aries. So you have the solar eclipse in the 8th, which is about wealth, assets, the financial material that you share with a partner, sort of an estate planning, wills, inheritances. I know you're like, Jesus Christ, Katie, wills, but that's the 8th. The 8th is where, we set up who inherits our stuff. And even if it's not an actual physical inheritance, even look at the emotional inheritances that you have. And maybe these could be the stuff that you're releasing, the stuff that you've been holding on for your family and their parents and their parents and their parents. That's that sense of legacy at this time. The full moon in Taurus really highlights material stability, material security, but more importantly, this much larger story that's been happening since 2018, 2019 about completely reinventing your relationship with money and income. What is valuable to you? What do you want to invest your time and money in, and what's even sort of important? And maybe there have been shifts in how you earned a living over the past few years. Maybe there have been shifts in spending, and maybe even like how you spent money or accumulated resource a few years ago. Certainly the world has changed a lot over the last few years. Is very different than how you're doing it now. And this even touches on self-worth. And I wish it were different, but how you earn a living and sort of that sense of value and worth, it's often intertwined with self-worth and that discomfort we feel about asking for what we're worth, for example. With the eclipses activating Saturn square Uranus, you have Saturn is in your 11th of community, friends, the future, looking ahead, but Saturn's also a career planet for you. This may bring up something about your career, about your direction in life, about how you earn a living, or sort of the value of your place in the world. And that's why to say at the bottom, like, what's your value? What do you of your place in the world? Like, what do you contribute? Like, how do you want to be a participant in this world? And especially as Saturn wraps up its time in your 11th, this idea of social issues and social causes and becoming more socially aware and getting very clear about who your friends are and who your friends aren't. So really see what's happening with your professional life. If there's a shakeup, Saturn square Uranus plus the eclipses. And then more importantly, because these eclipses activate Saturn square Uranus, go back to February 2021, June of 2021, and December of 2021, because these events actually may be threaded. Taurus and Taurus rising. So these are what are called 7th and 1st house eclipses. Now, Taurus, you are a fixed sign. You are the first fixed sign. And Taurus, I want you to go back and reflect on your life since May of 2018, May 15th, 2018, and March 6th, 2019. Because that's when Uranus went into your sign, and it will spend 7 years in total in your sign. And do keep in mind, you're like, 7 years in my sign. Well, your Uranus takes 7 years to go through a zodiac sign, and it's an evolutionary planet, which means that you, Taurus, are in the evolutionary hot seat right now, and you've been for the past few years. It's quite possible that the version of you and how you expressed who you are in the life that you were living in 2018 is vastly different than the life that you are living and how you're expressing yourself now. You may even physically look different. I can think of a couple of Tauruses off the bat who have changed their appearance radically, whether it's through diet, whether it's through transitioning. Of course, every Taurus is different, but this has been a crisis point at different junctures, Taurus, where you've had to really meet the energy of Uranus. And it's important to work with this energy. I think Taurus, by its nature, because it's a fixed sign and because it likes things to stay the same, sometimes you've resisted change. And you don't want to resist Uranus. You want to work with it. And if there's something that's been bubbling up, especially bubbling up for the past few years, and you kind of keep hitting the snooze button, of course, your life is your own, but don't. Make those changes, make those way overdue changes. And that's why, the last line in this text, it says, what is the most radical thing you can do? Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is the thing that you've been putting off, the thing that in your deepest heart and soul that you have to do. So you do have a solar eclipse in your 7th. The 7th is your sign of relationship. So just by the nature, it says that over the next 6 months, you're going to see new beginnings in relationships. If you are already in a committed, intimate relationship with somebody, it's a new chapter. Sometimes that new chapter is two people taking the next step up. Marriage, moving in together, having a kid, making a move, or other major milestones in the relationship. If you're not in a committed relationship and you desire one, this is your window to really go out and meet people, to really work with the energies of new beginning and new beginnings, plural, in your relationship sign. If it's not important for you to have a romantic relationship right now, just note that this is a time that is about relationships overall. Like, this is about people coming into your life. And sort of that reminder, Taurus, that you can't do life alone. Life needs partnership, it needs cooperation, negotiation. But because eclipses being eclipses, because Saturn square Uranus, these eclipses, October, November, are major turning points. They may usher in rapid changes. This is the thing, everybody's differently. And I feel that those that are born around April 21st to 25th or May 5th to 9th are going to feel this the most. Again, what does that even mean? It just means the next 6 months may be a time that bring in powerful new beginnings, powerful changes, and possibly your life of the next 6 months is going to look very different than it did the 6 months before. We will see. Again, this is pushing forward changes that were seeded back in 2018, 2019, when Uranus went to Taurus. And with that, again, the major new beginnings in relationships with Mars, where Neptune, Mars is is your relationship planet. Mars is in Gemini. Gemini is your second. There is something around value and worth and sort of material stability, material security in a relationship. Mars square Neptune, there's the push to let something go, especially with the South Node there, that you've been holding on to, maybe holding on to in a relationship, something from the past, maybe these deeper themes about value and worth and self-worth and intimacy in a relationship. And really making sure that you and somebody else, whether it's an intimate partner or an important one-on-one person in your life, that you're on the same page, that you are aligned towards the same values and in the same direction and the same futures. Another thing to mention, Taurus, is that Saturn is your career sign or your career planet. And maybe this is bringing some shakeups in your career, some shakeups in the direction that your professional life is taking. And maybe you want to do something very different. Maybe you've been sort of afraid because it's going to take changes. You're going to have to get out of your comfort zone, Taurus. But this is where the leap of faith happens, Taurus. And I do believe in the power of Taurus, that even if there are big changes right now, that Taurus by their very nature is going to do what they can in order to rebuild and recreate stability and security in their lives. But it just means, Taurus, that you have to do it differently. Like I know these Tauruses in my life, and their instinct is to like have the house, to have the stuff, to do it this way, and God bless them, and I love it because you give me food, you make things nice, Taurus, but you just have to do it differently now. And if you've been accumulating things for the sake of stability and security, just reevaluate if you actually need those things, if you need something else, for example. And lastly, Venus is your planet. It's in Scorpio at the time of the eclipses, so it is going to bring up themes about intimacy and vulnerability in relationship and getting uncomfortable, air quotes, with people. Gemini and Gemini rising. So this is a 6th and 12th house eclipse for Gemini. The thing about Gemini, and this is the case for the other mutable signs, is that you're not feeling these eclipses. I feel like I said this for another sign, like I am feeling these eclipses. I'm pretty sure that's particular to your astrology, but just on a larger level, Gemini, Virgo, Pisces, Sagittarius, you're not feeling this the same way that the other signs are feeling this, but you are feeling it, of course. And the thing about the 6th and the 12th is that this is about this divide that happens between our physical lives and our non-physical lives, our spiritual lives, for example. More importantly is that these eclipses activate Mars and Gemini. So, hey, Gemini or Gemini rising, you've had Mars in Gemini since what? August 20th. Mars will be in Gemini for 7 months. That's a long time. And Mars will turn retrograde in Gemini on October 30th at 25 degrees of Gemini. So near the end of Gemini. These are my Geminis that are born around the 17th, 16th of June, 18th of June, 15th of June, for example. So as these eclipses activate Gemini, Mars and Gemini, you're going to have a lot of energy. You're going to want to like go out, do something, strike out, be a leader, make a choice, go after what you want. But there is this kind of funny thing that's happening because Mars is about to turn retrograde, which means that you're going to enter a period that takes you until January 12th, where you have to reevaluate your relationship with power and how you take action. And even reevaluate how you use your voice, how you communicate. Do you have a lot of things that you've been trying to say and nobody's been hearing you, but now you really got to make sure people hear you. But Mars is square Neptune. And that's where it's like you want to take action, you want to strike out, you want to go forward, but maybe you're feeling like there's events that are bigger than you and that you've got to somehow resolve this tension between sort of these greater altruistic desires and designs and sort of these spiritual leanings in the part of you that's actually very human. Maybe you want to go after somebody, don't. Maybe you do want to go after somebody and you're like, you know what, if I do that, that's maybe not the best thing. It's going to do this and that. It's going to cause problems. Neptune is in your 10th of reputation, your career. And so there's this push and pull between your professional life, but also your own personal desires, wants, and needs. Mars and Neptune, when they're working together, it's like your choices, your actions, your words are actually in support of something greater than yourself, whatever you want to call it, higher self, spirituality, altruism. The solar eclipse in Scorpio is happening in your 6th sign, and the 6th sign talks about health and wellness, work, projects, getting things organized. The 6 is also very systems level, and this is a time where over the next 6 months, you have to look at the systems of your life. The systems, small systems, these are schedule, how you show up on a day-to-day, how your life runs, but also how do you sit in the command seat of your life? And are you sort of afraid to really sit in the driver's seat of life? But there's a lot of energy around power in the Gemini part of the eclipses, but it's how you use that power. For example, from a traditional astrology standpoint, to have eclipses in the 6th sign or the 6th house, you want to be mindful of your health and wellness. You want to make the perhaps overdue and necessary changes in your physical life. This means getting your checkups, taking care of your physical being, taking care of the systems of your physical being, nutrition, diet, exercise, fresh air, sunshine. But then you have a 12th house eclipse, and that's the lunar eclipse in Taurus on November 8th. And this is a lunar eclipse that is, you already had a lunar eclipse in this part of your chart back on November 19th of 2021. When the 12th house, the 12th sign is activated, it's a space in the astrology chart where our physical lives dissolve and prepare for the next life. It's not about our ego and want and ambitions and desires. It's about making space for something new, learning to let go, release, and surrender. If the 6 is about physical health, the 12th is about spiritual health and the soul, and sort of the soul's needs and wants and desires, and the physical body's needs, wants, and desires. So you're sort of having, how do you bridge heaven and earth at this time? How is health and wellness actually holistic? And I don't mean holistic just with emotional health, but spiritual health, and how maybe this is a time when you have to really get into these deeper existential questions. And that's actually a lot of what Gemini has been navigating over the past couple of years, especially with Saturn in the 9th, is sort of these deeper philosophical questions. Why am I here? What does this mean? Where am I going? Does this mean anything? And so maybe with the 12th house side of things, you have to lean hard on your spirituality. And there's a sense of faith, and there's the faith of the 9th, which is the faith of religion, and a book told me to believe in something, or my teacher told me to believe in something. But then there's the faith, the 12th, which is where you have a direct experience. You have that understanding and clarity, that flash of insight, kind of like, when I said that earlier when I was talking about the eclipses of 2003, where it was like right before I came to New York, and there was this moment where I just knew, like I knew my name, that I had to move to New York City, and I knew nobody. I kind of knew a couple people from the internet, but that's, there's no community. I had to completely remake my life. And you could have said, well, Katie, you could have chose not to, but this was something bigger than me. It was like a pull, that sort of greater pull. And so that's where, maybe you're really feeling those bigger, deeper, soulful insights at this time. I think especially as Saturn starts to wrap up its time in your ninth, you're sort of getting a sense of what you believe in, what is truth, what do you stand for, what's your faith, what's right and wrong. And that's sort of the shadow side of Gemini, is that it has its own morality, its own sense of right and wrong. But Saturn the ninth is like, no, you have to get very clear about this is right, this is wrong. These are the consequences of our actions, the consequences of our choices. And so that said, again, new beginnings in health and wellness, new projects, new initiatives, really getting into the details of life, but at the same time, retreat, letting go, and tending to your soul and your spirit. Cancer and Cancer rising. So these are 5th and 11th house eclipses. Cancer, you are ruled by the moon. And so your life has this natural ebb and flow. You have the new moon every month, you have the full moon 2 weeks later, and then the cycle begins again. So eclipses for you are just part of the ebb and flow of life, and you feel it more emotionally than the other signs do. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent for a second, but when I was learning astrology, people were like, oh, eclipses, it's about the moon. It's more emotional. And I feel like that was kind of doing a disservice, because eclipses are very event oriented, even the lunar eclipses. That said, back to you, Cancer, that this is a time when you really are feeling powerful emotions because you are ruled by the moon. So let's start with Scorpio. Scorpio is what's called your 5th sign. And the 5th sign is a lot about identity and creativity and self-expression. And you've been in this time, and this does touch on the eclipses of April and May, and even, the stuff that was happening when the nodes shifted signs back in January. It's like, who are you? How do you express who you are? How do you value your talents and your creativity? And so over the next 6 months, like, you have to get back to you. But it is a South Node eclipse. And so the South Node says that there's work to be done, that there are the times in which you abandoned yourself, the times in which you let go of who you are, you capitulated your wants and needs and desires. And with Saturn in your 8th, and this is something that we've been talking about the past couple of years, you're in the 8th room, Cancer, is that this has been a time where you've had to really do a lot of deep emotional work since 2020, when Saturn first went into Aquarius. So this is a time where there's a lot of movement, a lot of emotional movement. You're really doing a lot of deep work and reflecting. Uranus is in your 11th of friends and community. And so there's sort of this push and pull between the self and identity, and how you show up in the world, and how you show up in friendship, show up in your community. And maybe these sort of deeper themes about power and control, and the power games that happen in your social circle, the power games that happen with friendship or in your community, and maybe even sort of the self-destructive energies that we all have. But maybe this is a time when you're really reflecting on the times that you really do engage in self-destructive behavior. But this again is a time when you really have to get back to who you are. You have to really reaffirm your sense of self. In the first line, you might notice the words pregnancy and children. So this is, and obviously this is not relevant for everybody, but it's worth mentioning, especially if it is relevant to you. A very classical way of looking at astrology, and especially if you're trying to look for windows for the birth of a child or fertility, are eclipses in the fifth. The fifth is self and the self-expression and creativity and talents, but it's also children. And what is creativity? It's when we take something from us, we put it into something. What is making a baby? We take something from us, put it into something. In this case, it's a child. So a solar eclipse in the fifth may herald the birth of a child or a pregnancy. And so that's, the loss of self. And if you are a parent and you've had a child, I haven't, but I hear this from people, is that it really takes away from you. You have to, everything is now about the child. It's not about your wants and needs. It's about the wants and needs of your infant or your child and raising a child, and sort of these bigger senses of identity that come up. And especially with my clients who are coming out of, raising kids, getting them launched, sending them off to college. And then it's for that greater question of, who am I now? And maybe you are an empty nester and you're a Cancer and you're really scratching your head because you spent 15, 20 years, really putting all your focus on somebody else. And maybe it's not kids, maybe it's putting your focus on a relationship or a marriage. And then who are you? And so that said, that's why, if you don't want pregnancy, do what you have to do. But that might be a theme that comes up over the next 6 months or beyond. That said, Saturn is a relationship planet. Saturn is square Uranus. And so this is a time where relationships may shift. Certainly, if there's a pregnancy or the birth of a child, a relationship is going to shift. Saturn square Uranus says that relationships have to grow and evolve. They have to take a new shape and form. And if you're resisting that, really sit with why you're resisting that. These eclipses, especially Saturn square Uranus, and I'm saying this to you, Cancer, you're a sign that has a lot of emotional need and investment in things staying the same. This is not a very sentimental time with the astrology. And so there may be a need to break from the past, to let something go. But that said, themes about intimacy, vulnerability, trust, power, control, manipulation, rebirth, transformation, sex and romance, sex and power, sex and abuse, hopefully not. And so with also Mars, is a career planet for you, and Mars is really activated in these eclipses, and Mars is in your 12th. You may see some sort of theme around the career, around direction, and not just power, but your power in the world, and needing to answer Neptune's call. Why are you doing, why do you earn a living the way that you earn a living? Are you earning a living because that's the way that you were taught to earn a living? Is it actually in an alignment with your spiritual values? How do you make time for the things that are important? What do you need to let go of that's actually not supporting your life? And so there's a little bit of a sort of larger, where am I going? Where is this headed? And some of the deeper existential questions that come up. But again, it's about you and your sense of creativity and self-expression. And it's also about friends and community and your place in the world and the direction that you want your life to take. Leo. So as you may know, Leo is a fixed sign, and the fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And their desire, their instinct, and their function is to keep things the same. But that's the problem right now. And problem or liberation, depending on how you're looking at it, is that the things that you're used to being rock solid are not so rock solid. So these eclipses are happening in the 4th and the 10th houses. So you have a solar eclipse in your 4th, home and family. You have a lunar eclipse in your 10th, career. This is quite possibly a major turning point for you. And this might not necessarily happen exactly with the eclipses. You can look 3 months before. You can look at your birthday season. You can look at 3 months after. So this would be the end of January and into February, or maybe even a month from now. So November going into December. But nevertheless, in theory, that the way that this astrology is built for you and the way that your own astrology is built, this is a pivotal time for you, Leo. Most importantly, and sort of to jump ahead to that November 8th lunar eclipse, it's in Taurus, and Taurus is your career sign. And this is why, Leo, I really want you to go back and look at what's been going on in your professional life since 2018, 2019. Every Leo does this a little, is sort of experiencing this differently, but for some Leos, there's been a 180 in your professional life. The job that you do, the direction that you take your life in, the role that you play in the world is very different now than it was 3-4 years ago. The thing about Uranus, apart from the fact that it's an evolutionary planet and it's demanding evolution in your professional life, is that it also demands radical authenticity. Sort of the stock example that I use with Uranus going through the 10th is that if you are a lawyer, for example, because your parents were lawyers and their parents were lawyers and their parents were lawyers, and then you wake up one day and you're like, what am I doing? This is not what I want to do. But Leo, it's a fixed sign. It wants stability and security. It doesn't want to walk away from, earthly or sort of monetary stability and security, but there might be a clash. So this might be a time when you have to sort of really try to resolve that conflict between what you really want to do versus what you're doing right now. And this might be a turning point in your professional life. And maybe that change has already happened. It did happen in 2018, 2019, or it happened in 2020 or 2021. And this lunar eclipse is the next stage in this story. And because this eclipse activates Uranus, maybe it's a very dramatic time in these eclipses. On the other side of things, you have a solar eclipse in Scorpio, and that solar eclipse is in your 4th sign of home and family. It's also the household. Somebody moves in, somebody moves out. It's time to put down roots. It's time to move. And it's asking sort of this deeper question is, where is home and who is home? And as your professional life shifts and changes, or even your role in the world or your responsibilities and your duties shift and change, how do you make sure that your home base is actually supporting you? Because everything in astrology is about duality, and we can't overdo career, because if we overdo career, then our home life and what really is important suffers, just for the same reason why, if we're always sort of like afraid to launch ourselves in the world, like we're always stuck in the nest, so to speak. So there could be a shift in your living situation. There could be a major move. Mars and maybe sort of the shift is about, aligning your home life with the future that you actually want to create. And maybe it's bringing up a lot of deeper emotions. Neptune is in your 8th house, for example. And the things, and even sort of the skeletons in the closet, are the things from the legacy from the past and parents and memories, and maybe even traumatic experiences that need to be let go of, for example. But this is, again, it's a pivotal time for you, Leo. And I invite you to really go back and look at what's been going on since May 2018, March 2019, and especially as we've bounced back and forth between April, May, October, November in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. Saturn, which is in your relationship sign, for Leo, this has been a time about serious relationship, a time when you've had to build partnership and connection, recalibrate what's not working, or even end a relationship. Saturn squares Uranus, And this is a time about something shifting, transforming, and awakening in a way that perhaps is something that you're aware of. It's been with you the past couple of years. So there might be a shakeup in relationships. That, taking Uranus out of the equation for a moment and just looking at Saturn, is that you're staring down, the last 4 to 5 months of Saturn in your relationship sign. And this is a time where your relationships have had to come into shape and form. Things have to be put into balance. You have to make commitments to other people in your life. You have to be very, very clear about what do you want out of relationships, who you want in a relationship. But that might be shifting and changing, and sort of how you defined those things a couple of years ago may be very different than how you are defining them now. But again, pivotal time, and how do you get your professional life and your professional goals and aims to actually align with your heart? Never forget, Leo, that you are the sign of passion, a word that we think about like relationships and sexuality, but passion are the things in our life that lights us up, that gives us life. And you are ruled by the sun. Your goal, your role is to be the sun, to shine your light, even in your own quiet way. So don't forget to really nourish the things that give you heart, that feed your life, that allow you space to be you and to share and to express who you are. Because if you don't, it's really kind of running into the earth energy, and it's you're going to feel burnt out. Virgo, this is something that I was talking about with Gemini. You're what's called a mutable sign, and my mutable signs, my Geminis, my Virgos, my Sagittarius, and Pisces, you're not feeling these eclipses like the other signs of the zodiac are feeling them, but you are feeling them. You're just feeling them in a different way. For Virgo and Virgo rising, these are 3rd and 9th house eclipses. So we have Scorpio. Scorpio is your 3rd, and Taurus is your 9th sign. More importantly, you have Mars. Mars is in Gemini, and Gemini is your 10th sign of career. So this is a lot about education. It could be literal education. Maybe you're taking classes, you are going back to school, you are doing workshops, you're doing trainings, you're getting specialized education. But it's education that then informs your place in the world, your career, the direction that your life is headed. Even if it's not so literal, maybe this is a time where you have to see the world differently. I'm going to first start with the Taurus lunar eclipse on November 8th, because that Taurus lunar eclipse is activating a story that's been with you, Virgo, since 2018, 2019. The 9th sign of the zodiac, the 9th house, this is a place where we see the world. We have to either get on a plane or get in the car, or we have to go to college or university. We have to sort of read the books that inform us about the world outside of us. And it's a very worldly place as an extension. Because Taurus is the sign that's your 9th, and you are an earth sign, Virgo, sometimes you can get a little stuck in how you see things. And this has been a 3 to 4 year period of reevaluating your beliefs, your truth. Uranus is saying, like, maybe actually you should see things a little bit differently. And of course, this means different things to different Virgos. But that's just for me, to invite you to use these eclipses to re-examine, what do you stand for? What is your truth? What do you believe in? And maybe the things that you thought were rock solid beliefs 3 or 4 years ago are not so rock solid anymore. Maybe your view of the world has shifted. Maybe you've gotten out into the world. Maybe education and going back to school have been a priority. But with these things that have been happening, there's this story of needing to get new ideas, get new perspective, new information. You do have that solar eclipse on October 25th in your 3rd sign. So the interplay between the 3rd and the 9th is, hang on, The interplay between the 3rd and 9th is the 3rd is where we gather up ideas, we learn, we read the books, we go to school. But the 9th is where all that things have to form something. And so that forming something could be doing the research, writing something that then becomes a book, then becomes a publication, or doing a lot of public speaking that then forms a philosophy, a point of view, an opinion, lower T, truth. But this is a time where you have to share something with the world, Virgo. I realize world is a big word. It can just be lowercase w world, small world. But this is a time where it is about really, putting your ideas out there, really standing behind a philosophy, getting to the heart of mission, for example. With, there's so much emphasis on education, writing, communication, ideas, information, and that said, maybe there are big themes around information that are coming up over the next 6 months. And maybe with the fact that it's Scorpio, it's hidden information. It's secrets, it's taboo. And in Scorpio, especially when it's part of the mind and information, it's the things we don't typically talk about. And maybe you need to talk about something. Maybe you share something with the world that's typically kept private. Maybe there's something over the next 6 months that's about a research project. Scorpio, especially as Scorpio's 3rd, it's so good at doing the research and getting down to the bottom of a mystery. But there is this larger story around value and sort of the value of the choices that you're making, for example, and sort of these bigger questions of what do you believe in? Another thing, and I don't think I actually wrote this, but Saturn is in your 6th sign of health and wellness and work and projects, and Saturn will have just turned direct before the new moon solar eclipse, and Saturn is square Uranus, and sort of looking at your relationship with your health. Of course, this means different things to different Virgos, but this is a time where Saturn has made you very aware of your body and being in your body and sort of inhabiting your body and making sure your body runs on these systems that actually support your life. What's a system? It means like getting up, brushing your teeth, making sure you eat your vegetables, you get fresh air, you go for a walk. And maybe this has been a time where you've had to deal with something around your health. But especially with the interplay between the 9th, that's sort of these beliefs that we have about what's possible and even how we can heal. And sometimes we keep reaching for one way to deal with a problem, but these eclipses are actually inviting you to look at another way with dealing with the problem. Libra and Libra rising. I know I said this is going to be 2 hours, but apparently it's going to be longer. So thank you for sticking in. Okay, so much to cover. Libra and Libra rising. These are 2nd and 8th house eclipses. So you have a solar eclipse in your 2nd, you have a lunar eclipse in your 8th. Since Scorpio is a money sign for you. And so this is a 6-month chapter where it's really through the lens of money and income and material stability and material security. Mars, the ruler of this eclipse, it's in your 9th. So this is talking about these larger philosophies and beliefs about money and income. And think about it, Libra. Sometimes we tell ourselves certain things. Oh, I can't earn a living that way, or I can't make that money, or maybe even the beliefs that you've been carrying about money and income and material stability and material security that actually are not your beliefs. They're parents' beliefs. It's their parents' beliefs. It's like we have a parent that went through a war or went through the depression, or at this point a grandparent, unless you're older, and how stuff around money and value and security gets put upon us when it's actually not our truth, not our reality. So over the next 6 months, it is on a sort of a nuts and bolts level, really tending to the physicality of your life and making sure that you get your needs met, your resources met, and looking at how you earn a living and the choices that you are making with money and income, and sort of the philosophical choices that you are making with money and income. Then there's this other story, and I've been seeing this with I've been seeing this with my Libra and Libra rising clients, is that with Uranus in the eighth, this has been a time, especially with Saturn in the fifth, where you've been looking at self-destructive patterns. I know that that's a little bit of a dramatic statement, but this means different things to different people. And we all have parts of ourselves that go against ourselves. We all have moments where we are a bit self-destructive. Uranus since 2018, 2019 has been opening up a time for you to do deeper work about intimacy, power, control, vulnerability, the psyche, and even the parts of you that are in the deepest parts of yourself that you don't actually want to own. Saturn's time in Aquarius since 2020, you had to really face up to yourself and look at how you express who you are and maybe the less than helpful ways that you express who you are. But this has, created a lot of healing and transformation the past year or so for Libra and Libra rising. So there is this theme about value and money, but also creativity, self-expression, talents, gifts, and abilities. And what is the value of yourself, the value of your talents, the value of your creativity, the value of your time, and sort of how you sometimes don't take care of yourself or destroy yourself because you don't think you're of value. With a lunar eclipse in the eighth, I invite you, Libra, to work with somebody during this time. When the eighth gets highlighted, it's like we're not meant to do this alone. We need a therapist, we need a counselor, we need a trusted advisor, for example. This could also be that really powerful alchemy to create something. And maybe you are an artist or somebody who is creative, Libra. But that said, Saturn, it can be a turning point for you. Saturn is the planet of home and family. It rules Capricorn. Capricorn's the base of your chart. And maybe you're getting into these deeper themes around identity, self-expression, individuality, and how that can be in conflict with a parent or a family member or sort of the family at large. And maybe the times when you feel like a black sheep, for example. But how do you break through a lot of these old patterns that you inherited from your parents, from a family member, from ancestors, so that you can, going forward, live life on your own terms and really be, express the person that is within you, as opposed to the person that you are expected to be through other, social means. With Mars, it is a relationship planet. It is in Gemini, your ninth. There's sort of this greater story around relationships and surrender, needing to heal something, and maybe even make sure that you and somebody else are on the same page, because sometimes ideology and beliefs and truth, they clash. You do have Neptune in your sixth, so it's sort of the ways in which we have to show up for people and serve and to help, and maybe these sort of beliefs we have about serving and helping people, and sometimes we can sacrifice ourselves for a relationship or a partnership. But this is really eventually, because this is so much about money and material stability and income. The eighth is also about wealth, legacies, benefits, finance, assets, wills, benefits, if I didn't say that. But so doing a bit of financial planning around these eclipses. Libra, looking at your estate planning. I realize this is a little, hey, I'm a Scorpio, estate planning, and who is in your will, and then how do you want your legacy to be seen, and sort of what are you setting up for yourself, and maybe from an esoteric standpoint. And life is very short. The eighth house reminds us that life is very short, and what do you want to create that transcends you, that maybe even goes with you beyond this life? And maybe that's where you're getting into these deeper spiritual or esoteric or philosophical themes around this solar eclipse. But that said, especially with Saturn square Uranus, that this could be a really big turning point in the year for you, Libra. Scorpio. Scorpio, you are a fixed sign, and there's so much going on in the fixed signs at the moment. So this is a major turning point in the year for you. Let's start with the solar eclipse. Solar eclipse is on October 25th. It's what's called a first house eclipse for you. In the solar chart, it's putting you in the spotlight. And it's saying that over the next 6 months, Scorpio, it is a time of powerful new beginnings through the lens of Scorpio. And because you are a Scorpio, or you are an honorary Scorpio because you're Scorpio rising, we all know deep in our heart and soul that new beginnings are born out of endings, and that sometimes things have to end, or air quotes, die, so that something can come in its place. Scorpio, go back and look and reflect at 2013, 2003, as I highlighted those dates earlier in our program together. But if you were born around October 23rd to 28th, or November 6th to 12th, you're feeling this the most. And to have a solar eclipse on your birthday, those are my people watching that are born on October 25th, plus or minus, but especially on October 25th. The next 6 months are going to look very different than the previous 6 months. And I say 6 months because eclipses work in these 6-month chapters. These are eclipses, Scorpio, that you do have a lunar eclipse in your 7th. The 7th is about relationships, partnerships, socialization, interaction. The 7th reminds us that we cannot do life alone. Do keep in mind, Scorpio, that since 2018 and 2019, May 2018, March 2019, you've had Uranus in your relationship sign. This means different things to different Scorpios. I've had plenty of Scorpio clients who were single for 10 years, and then somebody comes into their life that is so different than anybody they've ever been with, and hopefully a lot happier than they ever been with somebody in the past. It has been a time of transformations, awakenings, growth, powerful transformations, powerful growth in relationships. And if you are in an existing relationship, and I've also known Scorpios that are in 20, 30-year marriages, and like the nature of that relationship has to take a different shape and form. And maybe, for some couples, it's like there's a certain dynamic, and that dynamic has really reached the end of its time. And a new dynamic has to come in, because Uranus talks about growth and evolution. It talks about sometimes the evolutions that are bigger than us and asked of us. And I think at the heart of this time for Scorpio, one of the hearts of this time, is that Scorpio has to open up to other people. Scorpio is typically a sign that has a lot of guard. It is a sign that's trying to outmaneuver life. There's nothing wrong with that. But we can't outmaneuver everything, because there are times when there's capital L life. And even though Scorpio knows this, intellectually knows this, it's another thing to go through it. And I know that Scorpio is good in a crisis. And I know that Scorpio can navigate capital L life, but that sense of control, that's where I think a lot of the friction point is happening right now for Scorpio and Scorpio rising. So it's like, how are you going to let people in, Scorpio? And I think, especially with Mars in the 8th, Mars is in Gemini, Gemini's your 8th, and Mars is square Neptune. There's something about the next 6 months where you, despite your Scorpio powers, you're not in control. I know that that's not a comfortable statement, and I'm happy to be wrong, and maybe this is going to be different for every Scorpio, but it's like when you have two evolutionary planets, Uranus and Neptune, really driving your astrology, there are events that are bigger than you that are happening. Keep in mind, Scorpio, that Mars is your planet. It's in Gemini. It's in your 8th for 7 months. It went into Gemini on August 20th. It does not leave until March 25th of 2023. You are in the 8th room, Scorpio. You are the 8th sign, and you are in the 8th room. And when we're in the 8th room, we are being tested by life. We have to go into the deepest, uncomfortable parts of ourselves and do the work. And yes, Scorpio will do the work, although my joke about Scorpio is that they will do the work on their own terms and when they're good and ready. But this is when the astrology is saying, no, now is the time. What is at the dark heart of everything? What have you been not facing? What is the source of this guard, this protection, this mistrust, this distrust? What happened to you that you are still holding on to that really honestly needs to die, needs to go, needs to end? So this is really bringing up these bigger themes about vulnerability, intimacy, power, control, sexuality, secrets, trust, stability, security, relationships, other people, partnerships. And then Saturn's in your fourth, and Saturn's been in your fourth since 2020, March 2020, December 2020. And it's been so much about family right now. And family means different things to different people, but sort of this bigger question, or questions, plural, where is home and who is home? And I know a lot of Scorpios have made major moves, and that major move has been a way of answering where is home and who is home. Who are the people that you want to be part of your family or part of your household? And maybe you have been setting up a household, or maybe you have been, there was a birth of a child, or you have been really settling down into life. And when I said this to a Scorpio, it's like, it's time to settle down. They looked at me like I was crazy. And I don't, it's not a white picket fence settling down, 2.5 kids settling down. It's settling down into you and into life. And what does that mean? That means different things to different people, but to come into life, and to come into life more deeply, and sometimes to come into life as you face the deaths of others. And I'm saying this from personal experience. I'm not saying this is going to be you, but as Scorpio, I have experienced a lot of death in the last year and a half, 2 years. So how do you do the work, Scorpio? How do you look at the shadow, the negative ego, the deep self? How are you using this time to reinvent? Because you have to reinvent. It's time, capital T, air quotes, time. And this is all building upon these changes, as I said, since May of 2018, March of 2019. But it is going to take surrender. And when I talk about surrender with clients, surrender, it's a word, and there's an intellectual relationship with that word, but there is a reality to that word. And surrender is where your whole body allows something to happen. There's no tense, there's no mind is trying to outmaneuver something. It's you're actually allowing something to happen. And maybe you're allowing a relationship to happen, maybe you're allowing a move to happen, or a shift or a change. But this is also a shift and change in how you speak and listen and how you communicate, and really, exist in the power of your voice, Scorpio. Sagittarius. Like your fellow mutable signs of Gemini and Virgo and Pisces, you're not feeling this astrology in the same way. It's sort of touching on these less than tangible things, to give or take. It's more about these sort of larger conceptual themes of faith and truth and meaning. That said, Sagittarius, Scorpio is your 12th sign, and Taurus is your 6th sign. So let's first start with the Scorpio, Scorpius, the Scorpio solar eclipse of October 25th. Sorry, let's lights again. So the solar eclipse is in your 12th sign, and the 12th sign represents the end of your personal zodiac wheel. And it's the place where your physical life and your spiritual life divide. The physical goes back to physical, the spiritual goes back to spiritual. This is not a space for your ego. And it's saying that over the next 6 months, Sagittarius, that this is a time for you to reflect on your spiritual life. And maybe you're thinking, Katie, I don't have a spiritual life. And this is, when I say spiritual life, I don't mean go to church. I mean, it's not about religion. It's about that relationship, that very intimate relationship that you have with something outside of yourself, whatever you want to call it. And maybe you don't believe in anything, maybe you believe in yourself. But that said, this is a time when you have to look at endings. And I realize that word doesn't make everybody comfortable. But the 12th is where we come to the end of something. It's the end of the road. And we have to release, we have to prepare, we have to let go, we have to retreat. We have to prepare again for a new life. And this is just part of this time. And what is your relationship with the sign of Scorpio, Sagittarius? I mean, Sagittarius, there is the sense of like, everything's going to work out. I don't know how it's all going to work out. But there's a reality to Scorpio, and those very uncomfortable emotions that can come up. And sometimes the stuff that's buried deep in the unconscious, because the 12th represents the part of ourself that we can't see. Our unconscious self, our blind spots, our dreams, our illusions, but also the part of us that exists outside of this life. And you are more non-physical than physical. You can only see this much of yourself, Sagittarius. In physics, in the creation of the universe, we can only see 5% of the universe. How do I know this? It's actual science. 5% of the universe is visible by light. 95% of the universe is invisible to light. It is dark matter or dark energy. So that part of you, Sagittarius, that does feel the call to adventure, does feel the call to explore, and maybe go into those invisible parts of yourself, because there is 95% of yourself that you cannot see. It is dark matter and it's dark energy. And maybe you need to have some sort of internal faith or internal compass, or some sort of spiritual leaning, or some way to answer these deep questions. And maybe you're going on a retreat, or maybe you're going within to find these answers. And maybe Sagittarius, you're a little burnt out and you need to recuperate. You need to focus on health and wellness over the next 6 months, and sort of the sense of spiritual health, but also physical health. The Taurus lunar eclipse on November 8th, it activates Uranus in Taurus. You have had Uranus in Taurus since 2018, 2019. It's affecting your relationship with your physical body, your health, your wellness, how you occupy your physical being. And every Sagittarius, of course, is going to experience this differently. And I can only say this from personal experience because I'm Sagittarius rising. I remember the summer of 2018. Sorry if I've told this story before. I was working from home because I was still at my day job, and I was on a very short list of people that were allowed to work at home. This is pre-COVID, and because they had a lot of rules, and that was because there was going to be construction in the office. And so I was like, woohoo, I get to work from home. I'm the queen of my own domain. I remember that my spirit guides were like, get ready, because this is going to be your life. You're going to be working from home all the time. But that summer, because I'm a New Yorker and suddenly you're not walking everywhere, you're not on the subway, you're not out, I was like, wait a second, I got to make sure I get some exercise. So I started to go on these, almost like pre-dawn walks in my neighborhood. I used to live in this beautiful neighborhood in Brooklyn that had all these big houses, Dittmas Park, by the way, if you know the area. And there was one morning where I was walking, I was listening to music, and my body just wanted to start running or jogging. It's not called running. And I remember thinking, like, what are you doing, body? Like, we don't run. We don't do that. But it did, and it wanted to. I had to honor that there was this shift that's happening. So whether it was a shift in my day-to-day life, suddenly I'm working at home, and now that's, fast forward 4 years later, this is what I'm doing all the time, or a shift in my physical health, my relationship with my body. Remember, your body is the first relationship that you have. It's not your mother, it's your physical being. And maybe there's been some demands to make some physical changes in your health and wellness over the past 4 years. Fast forward to yesterday I went to the gym and I actually jogged for 5 minutes without stopping. And you're thinking, that's nothing, Katie, but you don't understand. That is a minor miracle of God. That's really a miracle of my body. And I remember after the end, I was like, thank you, body. Like, thank you for being able to do this. Even though I'm about to turn 44, because that is a blessing. So how do you have a very different relationship with your body? And maybe you've been disconnected from your body. But that said, the relationship between the 12th and the 6th is about the relationship with physical health, non-physical health, the things that you can see, the things that you can't see. Earth heaven, service in the world, service in your day-to-day life, service to something greater. So there's sort of this duality that's happening, and maybe, these are going to be even more changes in your day-to-day life, and maybe these are changes that have been building up over the past few years. That's why I say to go and watch the story as it's been unfolding with the eclipses since 2021, but also, Uranus and Taurus since 2018, 2019. Jupiter, your planet, and I just want to highlight this because Jupiter is in Aries, and Aries is a Mars-ruled sign, and Scorpio is a Mars-ruled sign. So Mars is a big player in this astrology. And guess where Mars is? Mars is in Gemini. And Gemini is your relationship sign. So you have Jupiter in your 5th sign of creativity, self-expression, English hard, creating things, but also romance, passion, the passion of life, the romance of life. And then you have Mars in your 7th. So these are eclipses that could bring in a relationship, but it's a relationship where there's a need to make some adjustments, to let something go, to make some space, make some room for somebody else. And Mars, it will turn retrograde in your 7th sign of relationships on October 30th. So really pay attention to the story around then. But you have Neptune in the part of the chart that talks about home and family, and sort of these changes in your home environment and even your emotional core since 2012, when Neptune went into Pisces. But Mars and Neptune talk about surrender, and maybe that's what relationships are. It's an act of surrender. It's that you have this connection with somebody. It's like your life has to shift and make space for somebody. But Jupiter, it's right on the edge of Aries, and by the way, it's going to go into Pisces, especially by the time of that lunar eclipse in Taurus. So, maybe another thing that's happening is also changes in your home environment, and sort of the projects that you need, and sort of the changes in your living situation in order to get things organized and to put things into place. Starting to get towards the end. Thank you all for hanging in there. Capricorn and Capricorn rising. So these are 11th and 5th house eclipses. And this is a major eclipse for, Capricorn, not in the way that, because it's, you're like, well, this is not exactly highlighting Capricorn, but Saturn is Capricorn's planet. And this eclipse is highlighting Saturn, and Saturn is square Uranus. So this could be a major turning point for the year. And I invite Capricorn to go back and look at February of 2021, February 17th, June 14th of 2021, and December 24th of 2021. And these are the 3 dates of Saturn square Uranus. And Capricorn, by its nature, it's about structure and organization and planning for the future and building, and Uranus doesn't care. Uranus is about evolution and maybe building and constructing something that is very different than you've been building and constructing in the past. And so 2021 was a pivotal time for you. So that said, you do have a solar eclipse in your 11th. The 11th is the part of the chart that talks about friends and community, the groups that you're involved in, your sense of your social awareness, social issues, social causes, politics, but also the future. And to go back and look at May, because you did have a lunar eclipse in this part of your chart, so it sort of continues the theme about friends and community. But this eclipse, it's about a new beginning. And Mars, the ruler of this eclipse, is in the 6th. So this is about service to others, service to your community, service to your friends. Mars is square Neptune. Neptune is in your 3rd. It's about needing to really release, let go, and purify, and sort of do the spiritual work, to look at health and wellness, to look at the choices that you've been making, and how those choices have been affecting your life. And then you have a lunar eclipse in Taurus. Taurus is your fifth sign. By the way, the fifth sign also talks about pregnancy and children, in case that's relevant to you. You did have an eclipse back in November 19th of 2021 in this part of your chart, and a solar eclipse on April 30th in this part of 2022 in this part of your chart. But there's been this bigger story happening with Capricorn. There's a lot of big stories with Capricorn because you have Pluto and Capricorn. There's been a lot of changes in self, and sort of the stripping away and the reinvention of who you really are, Capricorn, because Capricorn can really get into the script of what is expected of them versus who they really are and what they really want. And so there's been this personal evolution, the evolution of the expression of self since 2018 and 2019, and even reinventing who you are, Capricorn. That said, this is really highlighting these deeper themes about self, creativity, self-expression, and being who you are, and how that shows up in your friends and your community, how you share who you are, and sort of sometimes the tension and sort of the push and pull that can happen between you and other people. So new friends may be coming in, and maybe these are new friends that are really a reflection of a lot of the big changes that you've been making, or the big changes that have been asked of you over the past few years. Don't forget, with Mars in your sixth, this is a time where you can't neglect health. You have to really look at the systems that your life runs on. This is like making sure everything is neat and organized and tidy, that you get your checkups, that you take care of yourself, you eat your vegetables, you brush your teeth. And where is the system not working? Where is it working? Where does it need to evolve? Where do you need to make different choices? With Mars as the ruler of your fourth, this is also about releasing and letting go of things from the past, things from childhood, things from parents and ancestors, and how that legacy has really impacted your emotional and even physical health. But there is this sort of deeper question about what is friendship, who are the people that you want in your life, who are the real friends, and sort of, I say real in terms of value and worth. And so this is about sort of these bigger themes coming up, but this is possibly a major turning point for you. And this is the last time, a couple of things, last points to make about Capricorn. This is the last time that Saturn's going to square Uranus. It's not exact, but it's close. And then this is, Saturn's turning direct, your planet's turning direct on October 23rd. It's the last time it's turning direct in Aquarius for 30 years. Yeah, 30 years. And then on March 7th of 2023, it goes into Pisces. That is a new hour, a new time for you. So keep this in mind, Capricorn, that because you're beginning to wrap up a personal story. And as you start to wrap up this personal story, maybe some big things need to shift and change in advance of Saturn leaving Aquarius, and sort of these bigger themes about value and worth and money and income, how you're spending your money, what are you investing in, what do you own, what are your resources, what do you need, and versus what you really need. Aquarius and Aquarius rising. I know, we're like, this is going to be the 3-hour webinar. So Aquarius rising, you are my final fixed sign. And so this is a time when a lot of things are shifting and changing. This is a major turning point of the year for you, Aquarius. So first, let's sort of look at this bigger story that's been happening since 2018, 2019. Taurus forms the base of your chart. In May of 2018, March of 2019, Uranus arrives in the base of your chart. Uranus is an evolutionary planet. It talks about reinventions, awakenings, radical self-awareness, a need to align who you are with the sort of the greater whole, and to make necessary changes. But to have this evolutionary planet at the base of your chart means that home and family, your roots, your sense of connection, your sense of stability, emotional stability, has seen a lot of changes in the past few years. And maybe you have seen big changes in your household. Maybe there has been a big move. Maybe there will continue to be big changes in your household. Maybe there hasn't been a move, but will be a move. Where if there is a move, it's a move that may be very different than you ever anticipated. Maybe it's a move across country. Maybe it's a move to the part of the world that you never thought you would live, or maybe you always wanted to live. Uranus is about liberation and liberating us from the past and the things from, let's say, a growth standpoint are not allowing us to grow. If you grew up in a toxic household and an abusive family, and that's in your roots and your foundation, how do you leave that behind so that you can actually thrive in life, so that the soil of your life is actually fertile and not sort of poisoned by the past or the things that happened with your family or parents or other traumas and abuses, for example. This is obviously a very particular example. But that said, it's a time to come home, to reinvent home and family. And sometimes the shift is not an external shift, it's an internal shift. And you need to come back to yourself and to come into your roots and the foundation of your life. And maybe that is the most radical thing that you can do right now. And sometimes where is home and who is home is right here within. And there's been a long journey to be able to come here within Aquarius. That said, you do have a solar eclipse in Scorpio, which is your 10th sign of career, your place in the world. And over the next 6 months, this is about changes in your professional life, changes in your duties and responsibilities, your place in the world, how people see you, and maybe there's a job promotion, or maybe there's something else, for example. But your work and sort of the role that you play, it's a new chapter, and maybe you are going off in a new direction. This is the only Scorpio solar eclipse. You've had a Scorpio lunar eclipse on May 16th, and you'll have one next year on May 5th. So changes in your professional environment, Mars, which is the ruler of that eclipse, is in your 5th. And so there's sort of this direct connection between your professional life and your talents and gifts and abilities. And how do you express who you really are in your professional life, in your ambitions? How do you and your professional life align? But Mars is making a square to Neptune, and Neptune's in your 2nd house, and it's sort of these greater questions around value and worth, and making sure that sort of your ambitions and your worldly responsibilities and even your career aligns with your spiritual values. Because there's a conflict if you're earning a living and you don't feel good about it. You feel like it's actually taking away from your heart and your soul, as opposed to contributing something. Then there's the lunar eclipse on November 8th in your sign of home and family. And a very classic way of looking at that is that there is a change, a move, a change in the household. Somebody moves in, somebody moves out. But these are changes that have been seeded and sort of coming around the bend over the past few years. You did have an eclipse back on November 19th and a solar eclipse back on April 30th, for example. And this can not just be family, it can be parents, and maybe your parents need your attention. If an aging parent or a sick parent demands your attention, or maybe that sense of like that connection to family needs to fundamentally change. With Saturn square Uranus, I think this is one of the hardest things with Aquarius, is that you've been in this new time and there's been a lot of weight and responsibility on you, and sort of Saturn's been pushing on you, sometimes like led to really take the next step up in a chapter of your life. And with Saturn in your first, Saturn in your sign, Aquarius, like you've had to be the adult, you've had to be the parent, you've had to be the person leading, you've had to have the weight of the world on your shoulders. But with that Saturn square Uranus, that this is a year that's really trying to push you out of old grooves, old patterns, to grow and evolve. But things are really shaking up and shifting for you right now, Aquarius. Finally, Pisces. Thank you all for coming to my TED Talk. Pisces and Pisces rising. I said this for the other mutable signs, that this is the mutable signs of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. You're not feeling this in the same way that the other signs are feeling this, but nevertheless, you are feeling this. And these are what are called 9th and 3rd house eclipses. The ninth and the third, or the third and the ninth, depending on how you look at it, these are the parts of the chart that talk about education, information, ideas, learning, exploration, travel, faith, truth, and meaning. What do you believe in? What do you stand for? I think with the solar eclipse in Scorpio over the next 6 months, there are these deeper questions of faith and truth and meaning. And faith, it has a very religious, overtone in the English language, but faith is like your faith in the world, your sense of like, what is your life, what sort of philosophical framework is your life built around? Does that philosophical framework need to change? And even the faith that we wake up in the morning and the world is still there, the sun is still shining, that the things are going to keep going the way that they're going. So the next 6 months for you are looking at these deeper themes around, what's your philosophy? What do you stand for? What's your truth? What's your conviction? What's your sense of right and wrong? What's justice? Maybe the next 6 months are really giving you a lens to align with a deeper sense of mission and purpose. Mars is the ruler of the eclipse, and Mars is in Gemini, and Gemini is your fourth sign of home and family. Maybe this is being an advocate for a family member or advocating for something about families and home. And with Mars square Neptune, it's like these sort of greater spiritual alignments that you want your life to be a part of. And I think that, Neptune has been in Pisces since 2012, and it's going to be there until 2026, 2027. And so Pisces has been more sensitive for the last decade, and will continue to be more sensitive. But, what do you build your life around, Pisces? What sort of deeper themes and truths, and maybe like that's at odds with a family member or how you were raised, and you have to really sort of stand up for what you believe in and what you feel like is your spiritual values and alignments. That said, the solar eclipse may bring changes in travel and education. Maybe this is a time of a lot of travel, foreign travel, long distance travel. Maybe this is a time to go back to school, a time to share your viewpoints, your opinions, get published, broadcast something. But you do have a lunar eclipse in what's called your third sign. And so the lunar eclipse talks about the interplay between how we see things, sort of this greater construction of belief, but also what are the individual words and concepts and ideas, and having to get different perspectives. And I think sometimes we can get really, I feel sometimes that we can get really in our blinders about what we think is possible and what our sense of judgments. And to have a lunar eclipse in the third is a reminder that you need to see things from different perspectives. You need to keep your mind open. And maybe the next days and weeks and months are bringing information and ideas and concepts that blow your mind. I never thought that was possible. I never thought that would happen. I never thought that way. Why didn't I have this information before? And maybe from a very traditional astrology standpoint, you do receive news that shakes things up. There is sudden information or sudden ideas or sudden perspectives that turn everything upside down. That said, with this, Mars in the fourth, there is something about, needing to move or tend to the household, or something about family, or maybe you have to move to another country, or a long distance move, for example. But again, this is so much about education, ideas, information, how you use your voice. Pisces, don't forget that this is a time where you really have to come into your voice. Voice is both the words out of your mouth, also how you inhabit those words, and even your intuitive voice. And don't forget, Pisces, you've got about 4 to 5 months left of Saturn in your 12th. This is a time when life is sort of ending and preparing for the next big chapter, when Saturn goes into Pisces on March 7th of 2023. Jupiter is right on the edge of going back into Pisces. It'll go into Pisces on October 28th. So there's sort of this endings and wrapping up and preparing and getting ready for new beginnings, for example. But the Saturn square Uranus really focuses on the intuitive voice, listening to your heart, listening to your soul, making sure you're choosing your words wisely, and maybe even sort of seeing your spiritual life from a very different perspective. So sort of these greater questions about relationship and sacrifice, compassion and faith. I realize sacrifice is just a negative connotation of sacrifice, but sacrifice is the things that we do lovingly for people or even our world. All right. Wow. 2.5 hours later, we have gone through each of the 12 zodiac signs. I want to stop the share and just go back and see if I missed any questions. This is your opportunity. If you want to ask a question, you're welcome to turn on your camera or put it in the chat if you're feeling shy. Hang on. Is there any added importance you have? The nodes, your chart, Taurus North Node. Hey, Taryn. Do you have a question or just saying hi?
Oh, I did have a question. I was actually curious. You talked about how these eclipses are affecting the mutable signs less, and I get why it would be less than the fixed signs, but I was wondering what in the astrology is making it less or different than how it's affecting the cardinal signs.
So the mutable signs, the focus of the eclipses are in what are called the cadent houses. And so it's these parts of the charts are a little bit more, I'm trying to think of English is hard at the moment. These parts of the charts typically are about information. The cadent houses and the mutable signs talk about the formation of knowledge and wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so it's less about the construction of our physical life and sort of these very distinct chapters. I mean, with some exceptions with some of the mutable signs, if their planets are involved in the eclipses. Mm-hmm. But that's why you're feeling it more on an intellectual and idea and information level than you're feeling it on this is my career.
Like foundational level.
Exactly. So that's why I feel that it's less. So
got it. Thank you.
Good question. There was somebody asking about the nodes in the chart. So I get this every time. If you have a north node in Taurus, which means you have a south node in Taurus, you are having something called a nodal return. So these eclipses are activating a story that's present in your natal astrology, your birth astrology. And so events in 2021, particularly 2022 and to some degree 2023, are part of a bigger story. It actually may echo events that you're very familiar with. If you have the opposite, which means you have a north node in Scorpio when you were born and a south node in Taurus, this is a critical year. And typically events that happen during a nodal reversal do talk about these deeper karmic stories, these deeper lessons, stories that I invite you to go back to 2003, 2004, just from a thematic level, and to see how there's this thread through these different moments in time. Hopefully that answered your question, Jennifer. Yeah, somebody has a birthday on the 25th. Happy birthday. Yes, it's going to be a powerful new year for you. I know this went a little bit long. Some people had to leave. And this is a good thing that we have this recorded so you can go back and watch it again. And maybe I'll include the timestamp so you can go back to your sign. And even for those that are watching this only on the replay, thank you for sticking it out. And it's kind of crazy. This is why I love eclipses, love air quotes, because they're just fascinating, because you will start to see patterns. And maybe this is the part of me that is both very scientifically minded, but also spiritually and very mystic and esoteric. And I'm just like, this is where you start to see the matrix. This is where you start to see that there's something invisible, but the eclipses make them visible. So Pamela is asking about health and particularly her older parents. Okay, so this is just information. It's not a prediction. And I say this as somebody who, I have a mother that passed last year and my father has pancreatic cancer. So I get it when parents are not well. The idea is, this is just my own not rule of thumb, but just how I approach astrology and health and people who are aging or people who are not in good health. If somebody is not in good health and they're coming up to an eclipse, it's just something for you to keep an eye on. I can only speak for myself. I can only speak like, and I said this to my dad, and this is again, not a prediction. It's just information. Like my dad was not well. And I was like, look, dad, your ascendant is 28 degrees of Scorpio. You're going to have an eclipse in your ascendant. Just, go get checkups. And it turned out that he was not well. And thankfully the cancer was caught early, but that's a personal example. This is a thing you never know, only God knows. And if they're not in good health, just do what you have to do in order to make sure that they have everything that they need at this time. And to be blessed to have parents that live that long. My mom passed when she was 70. My dad could be gone in a year. But I know that it's hard. And I just, the traditional way of looking at it is that if their health is not good, the eclipses can disrupt their vitality. So that's just information. Hopefully it's helpful information, but I know that it's when you're caring for a parent or dealing with a parent that's not well. And my hope is that this is fine, but if they're born on the 15th, or one of them's born on the 15th of May, they did have an eclipse on their sun back in May. So look to events around their birthday, events around August, because that was the midpoint of the eclipses, and how that sort of, you see a story that's tracking. But I hope everything's okay. So you're welcome. Let me see any other questions. Gemini Sun, Aquarius rising. And this is a little bit of a technical point. If you know your astrology and you're like, well, Katie, I'm not a Taurus, I'm not a Scorpio, but you've got major planets in Taurus and Scorpio. What are major planets? The ruler of your sun, the ruler of your moon, the ruler of your ascendant, and by extension, the ruler of angles and the ruler of major stelliums. So let's say you have a lot of planets in Libra. Libra is Venus ruled, but you have Venus in Scorpio, and then that eclipse is on Scorpio. So it's going to affect what's happening in your Libra stellium. Hopefully that makes sense. So you may be feeling stuff that is very evocative for the astrology of Taurus, but it's because you have a major planet in Taurus, for example. So hopefully that answers your question, Stephanie. Yeah, celebrate your birthday, Carol. I think that's it for the questions, unless anybody else had a question. I know it's coming up on 2 hours and 45 minutes. I thankfully still have a voice, by the grace of God. Pamela, you asked about the Scorpio moon. Yeah, you have a moon in one of the signs where there's an eclipse happening. And you would have had an eclipse in the sign of your moon on May 16th of this year. You would have had it activated in November of 2021 with the opposition, or April 30th with the solar eclipse. Look back at 9 years ago, 2013, 2014, with the eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. Even in 2003, 2004. Sometimes eclipses to the moon can talk about parents. There's this, I think, in astrology, we always want to say mom is moon, but I think it's way more complicated than that. Moon is family, it's home, it's household, it's subconscious memory, it's ancestors. And sometimes there is a move and change in the household when there is eclipse to the moon. I had an eclipse to my moon and I somehow ended up in Jersey. So everything changes. So thank you, Carol. Thank you, Pamela, Taryn, and I know some other people that have joined me for past webinars, or you are my clients, Rachel, Melanie. And if you have any last questions before we wrap up, I know this has been a bit of a long haul, but I appreciate each and every one of you. Yeah, so I think we're starting to wrap up. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Stephanie. We'll start to wrap it up here. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you. Unless you have a question, Melanie, or just saying,
Just that you're amazing
oh,
in every way. And thank you just always. It's kind of mind blowing. I've been looking at your Astro Bank chart and I can see why you're just so,
oh, thank you.
just thank you. It's so, I love this.
Well, no, I appreciate you all. And, you know, as a Scorpio, good God, as somebody who has Jupiter and Leo, Venus and Scorpio, I'm going through my Uranus opposition. I have Uranus at 17 Scorpio. I'm going to have the second opposition of my Uranus opposition on November 1st. Cool. And what else?
Wow, Day of the Dead, right?
Day of the Dead. Yeah, hopefully nobody dies. And then Chiron Taurus. So I'm in the fixed sign rodeo, just like each and every one of you. Yes, you know, thank you, Cornelia from Switzerland. I again appreciate you all. And yeah, we made it almost. Well, we made it to the end of the webinar. We've not made it to the eclipses. And these eclipses are just part of a larger story. And remember, the story is starting to come to a close in 2023. Use these eclipses the best that you can to just break out of the stuff that is really limiting you. And I think that's the blessing of these eclipses, is that there's both an unsentimentality to these eclipses, but also an evolutionary push. And what is the most radical thing you can do? What is the best sign? What is the best thing for you? And sometimes even the best thing for you and your family. Everybody answers this time differently. Like I said, 2021, I moved, never thought I would move, but I was, you know, trying to answer some bigger existential questions. And sometimes, you know, parents get sick and people pass, and you have to deal with big capital B, capital L life. And I hope for each and every one of you, that's not the case. I only know that I'm, you know, I have one parent who's passed, and then, you know, one that will probably pass within the year. So hug your loved ones. Take care of yourself. Scorpio reminds us that things do end, but Taurus reminds us that things come back into life, and to enjoy the sensuality of life. And maybe that's the best thing that we can do during these Taurus eclipses, is to graze, smell, touch, and eat, enjoy pleasure, enjoy your body, enjoy being here in this physical life while you can. So anyway, thank you all. And I will see you all, and I'll see you soon, Melanie, for our Saturn Masterclass. And for the rest of you, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. And until the next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care, Katie.
Bye.